Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 341. To Hope. They stayed in the vicinity for several days, during which they scavenged supplies and organized themselves. They lost a lot in this encounter. People, supplies, mounts, and carts. Most porters either died or ran. How were they supposed to find their item boxes in this chaos? At the start of the journey, they would have had the option to evade Hope, the city in the no man's land. Now, they needed to restock food and water if they wanted to make it to Delta, or at least Y City. Against the warnings of Pip and her people, they would have to stop by that place even if it had turned into hell on earth led by a bunch of psychotic bandits. From the previous caravan of almost 2,000 people, barely 400 were left. Less than a quarter, but these survivors were made up mostly of warriors, mages, and chimeras. The previously most numerous, workers and servants, had taken the greatest hit. Less than 100 had survived the skirmish. Surprisingly, the old man Seth had met at the worker camp had proven his tenacious talent to stay alive. He met him again because the old coot had managed to become the leader of what was left of the freed slaves. But it also meant they still had over 300 people able to fight. It was a force to be reckoned with, and the reason they felt confident in approaching Hope. The travel with fewer people on the open plain also meant that they became faster. They made a fourth of the way in a single day. The terrain was mostly grassland and posed no problem to their makeshift carts. It was starting to get dark when they decided to look for a place to rest. The scouts found a small lake in the distance. It was a good chance to restock their water supplies and set up camp for the night. But they were not alone there. At the small lake, they met an older man with a long white beard of fine hair. He wore a set of exotic white robes that matched his hair. When they arrived, he was simply sitting on a rock at the bank of the lake and fishing. He asked to speak with the leader of the caravan, Marcel said to Seth, who was leisurely setting up his tent. "What does that have to do with me?" the blacksmith asked. "Wah! I mean, you are our leader, right?" Marcel asked a little confused. Seth sighed. Yeah. I was just joking. I will come by in a second. Even if you are just the leader on paper and evade most responsibilities, there will still be stuff you have to do, the lich teased him. You start to sound like Mary. Hey! The man had not once stopped fishing and was still sitting on the rock when Seth approached him. He could feel a power similar to an appraisal skill scan him. The blacksmith was not polite and used observe in return. It came out without a result. The man was either not part of the system or so high level that Seth could get no info. Interesting. You have a perfect fire root and even something resembling a crude spiritual sense. Oh, I am sorry for my rudeness. This Taoist is called High Mountain, you may call me Master Mountain. A Taoist? Seth was sure he had read or heard about something like this at some point, but he couldn't quite remember. Oh, Greetings, Master Mountain, this blacksmith is called Seth Smith. You may call me Seth. He awkwardly mirrored the way the man spoke. He had the suspicion that his universal translation had actually translated the name of the man, too. Maybe it was bugging because the other was not part of the system? It is not your ability that is malfunctioning. This one has just recently learned the language of this continent. Did you just read my thoughts? Nothing like that. This old man has merely read your face. Interesting. Anyway, you wanted to talk to me. Ah, yes. As you may have inferred, I have only recently come to this world. You are the first people that have not directly attacked me, so I hoped you could tell me more about your home. This reminded him of his interaction with Drosy, but he didn't know whether the old man would give a remuneration for the information. I won't be to your disadvantage. I am willing to compensate for your time. Oh, did it show on my face? Seth asked embarrassedly. Do not worry. It is only appropriate. Seth didn't mind, they would stay here for the night anyway. He invited the old man to their fire. The elder thought for a moment before he stashed away the fishing rod and followed Seth. The night was still young, and they talked and ate together until deep into the night. The elder also quickly warmed up to the group. Like with Drosy, they explained what had recently happened to their world. They also explained a little about the system and their classes. So, you are an artificer? It seems quite fitting considering your physique. What is an artificer? Seth asked. Where I come from, an artificer, similar to an alchemist, uses fire to refine weapons and other magic treasures with fire. Guess this fits the bill. Are you maybe interested in becoming an alchemist, too? With your fire root, you could do both, easily. Another crafting direction? I'm still exploring this one and recently started another one to augment it. A third that goes in a completely different direction? No thanks. That's a shame. But just in case you ever change your mind, take these 2 books and this piece of meteoric iron as remuneration for your information. The elder gifted Seth 2 books, one was labeled entry-level pill recipes and the other was a catalog of magic tools with instructions on how to craft them. Besides the books, he also gave a small piece of iron ore that comfortably fit into his fist. Meteoric iron, epic, crafting material. A piece of iron ore from a foreign world filled with a mysterious power and an obscure will. It was small, but actually, a piece of epic-rated crafting material. The description made it seem even more interesting. The books were also interesting. He did not have the time right now and put them in his inventory, but wanted to take a better look at them later. Thank you, Master Mountain, he said, genuinely happy. It is just a fair exchange. No need to thank this old Taoist. The rest of the evening they made mostly small talk and the master told them a little about his own world. He was the elder of a medium-sized sect in a place called the Great Ocean Continent. He himself had no talent for crafting, instead he was good in something called cultivation. It was an intriguing way to absorb mana from the world to strengthen the body and soul. This meant he was very strong, which was the reason why he was the one that went out to explore Earth, when the passage opened. The next day they said their farewells. Master Mountain would not join the caravan, but he shared with them, that he would head west. Maybe they would meet again. Before we part, please take this. If you ever meet someone from the Great Ocean Continent, it might come in handy to drop my name. The old man handed Seth a jade slip with exotic sigils carved into it. Oh, thank you. I won't lag behind then. Take this ring. If you ever meet someone from Minas Mar, you can ask them for help. Seth handed the old man a smaller silver sigil ring that identified him as a friend of Minas March. With that, the blacksmith and the cultivator finally split paths and the caravan continued their journey to Hope. Chapter 342. Snake Magic. Except for their run-in with Master Mountain, there was no special occasion on the travel through the plains. The monster encounters had decreased a lot since they left the forest. The plains seemed peaceful at first look, but that was because they were almost completely devoid of life. It was so peaceful, that it was eerie. There had to be gates or even dungeons opening in this place, right? Where did they go? This question made them nervous and careful, even though they were traveling across an absolute quaint landscape. On the 3rd day, they finally saw a beast. The scouts reported a giant ram and a herd of big sheep. When Seth finally saw what they were talking about, he understood why they described it the way they did. The creature was as big as an elephant. It looked very imposing with its regal stature and 2 pairs of black horns. The herd was peacefully grazing on the plain. At least until one of the scouts got too close and was almost trampled to death. Fortunately, they only lashed out and did not escalate into a stampede. It was fortunate because they soon found out who were the owners of the herd. Giants. Actual giant. Not just big people, or really big monsters. According to the scouts, they were a group of 30-40 meter tall humanoids wearing rough clothes made from fleece. Let's stay far away from those, was the unanimous decision. They made a huge turn to evade the giant territory. It would cost them another day, but it was worth it. In the meantime, Seth had more than enough time to get a good look at the books the master had given him. He didn't have anything important to do anyway. The Artificer book did not directly give him any blueprint, unfortunately, but it explained some of the principles behind them. It is similar, but also different from how things worked in the system. Only at the very end, there were some detailed instructions on how some of these items could be created. The alchemy book was straight up a compendium of recipes for what it called the most common pills and potions for beginners, as well as the explanations for the individual steps. It seemed interesting, but Seth had no clue about alchemy ingredients. The names of plants and stuff sounded weird and were probably not the ones ordinarily used in the context of the system. He would have to bother Allison with these books, to see if she could understand them. Seth was itching to try some of them out for fun, especially stuff like basic body strengthening concoction. There were a few medicines described to improve and refine the human body that sounded like the potions and food that could give a permanent buff. All of this was also new to Alzalsar, and the Lich, too, absorbed the new knowledge with much fervor. Puffles and the Emuji, on the other hand, did not really seem to care. 2 days after they evaded the giant, they could finally see the skyline of hope on the horizon. It looked like one would expect a city to look after several decades with very little population. Most of the bigger buildings were in disrepair and overgrown with trees and vines. Only a small part of the old city was surrounded by a makeshift wall and looked to be maintained. The city was unlike the last bastion of civilization in an empty no-man's land they had heard of. It was much more like Pip had described, looking like a bunch of cavemen squatting in ruins of a fallen civilization. The wall gave a very post-apocalyptic impression while the smoke of many fires, that clouded the horizon, showed a lack of technology. The existence of a caravan with over 400 people was hard to hide on a wide plain. That's why they did not even try to begin with. The caravan waited at some distance away from the city. To Seth's dismay, it was decided that he should lead the party that would visit the city. The only person even unhappier than him, Pip, who was asked to come along as a native. She was unable to come up with a good excuse not to do it. Seth, Pip, the Chimera leader, and some of the warriors set off to enter Hope and gather information. They had just started to set off, when they saw a group of people leave through the crude gates of Hope. Their group of over 100 was riding on horses and similar mounts. The crowd was a mess of laughter and whistling. They easily outnumbered the 15 people Seth had set off with. "We have to hurry back to the caravan. That's a bandit group!" Pip shrieked and warned everyone. They had to return and get everyone to get in formation. "Don't worry so much, Pip," Seth said leisurely. The blacksmith had checked the rowdy attacker the moment they left the gates. With observe he gazed at an ocean of trash. These people barely even reached level 30, how had they even survived out here until now? Like in an old movie about the expansion to the west, the horde on their mounts started riding in a big circle around them. The manic cackling and whistling became even more high-pitched and crazy. One figure from among them stopped and came before them. It was a tall, burly man. He wore a leather armor with a decorative sheepskin draped over his shoulders. He also rode a big ram. "I am the leader of the sheep pokers and..." He was interrupted by Seth's uproarious laughter. "And we will spare you if," he tried again when Seth had calmed down a little, but once again, the blacksmith could not hold back his laughter. "Ha ha ha, sheep pokers! I mean, did you come up with that yourself, or did someone dub you like that after you tried to screw your mount? You. As you wish. I wanted to show mercy. Ha ha ha, you are a true comedian." Seth wheezed. Okay, I really needed that one." Things had been a little tense lately. He wiped away and suddenly spoke in a serious tone. "As thanks, I will give you a chance to survive. If you and your clowns retreat within the next 30 seconds, I won't kill you." The bandits broke out in arrogant laughter themselves when they heard him speak. They were just 15 people against the 100 of them. The bandit leader did not understand what was happening, but when Seth spoke, there was no way he could interrupt him. Something in his voice assured him of his demise. This man was dangerous, but even if he wanted to retreat, seeing the reactions of his men, there was no way they would listen. 25, 24, 23, 22. To make things worse, that man was even counting down. He was mocking him. In front of his men. The decision was made. "Everyone! Attack!" The burly leader lifted his saber to signal the attack. "You had great potential as a comedian, but you chose tragedy." Dragon might, the cold voice pierced into the bandit's ears, and moments later he felt a terrifying pressure. All around him he saw his men fall like flies. People's eyes rolled back as they lost consciousness and fell off their mounts. The beasts' eyes rolled up, as they also lost consciousness. The heavy mounts fell, often squashing their rider or parts of them. The leader was not much better off. Barely staying awake, a tremendous weight was crushing him to the ground. Fallen off his mount, he crawled on all fours and could not even lift his head to look at the people he had just threatened to kill. "What do we do with them?" the Chimera leader asked. "Well, I did promise them death. But it seems like a pain to go around and kill all of them." Pip was looking at Seth speechlessly. He had not even used fire. He did not even sing or swing his sword. He just lifted his shield and the bandits that had turned her life to hell buckled. "Let me do it. I want to try out the new magic I learned," a childish voice suddenly said. "This is a good chance for the emoji to level. Let it do it." "Arim, fine. But what magic did you learn this time?" Seth asked, confused. Had it not just recently learned healing magic? It did not intend to heal these people, right? His concerns were unfounded. The little emoji, looking like a chubby snake, appeared beside him. Chain lightning, it called out, and a wave of lightning bolts emerged from its mouth that shot at the unconscious bodies and kept jumping back and forth between them. They twitched and frothed, but none of them ever woke up. The only cries of fear and pain came from the bandit leader, who had been holding on but now wished he wasn't awake for this kind of execution. Chapter 343. Misleading name. Hey, that's my magic, the chimera exclaimed indignantly. It was true. It seemed that the emoji had learned the magic from watching it on the battlefield a few days ago. It was not called a genius in magic for nothing. Mastering high-level magic this easily. The only problem was its lack of mana. That had already been a headache when they were healing people the other day. Seth was glad it finally got the chance to level up. With more mana it could. Why did it only gain 3 levels? It had just killed roughly 100 people around level 30 and only reached level 4 from it. That should have been at least enough for it to reach level 15 or even 20. What was going on? PFF, obviously strong races need more experience to level up. Al said. Why? Balancing. Just a joke. It simply is like that. I have no explanation why it is like that. You learned a lot from my games, to crack jokes like that. More like bad influence, the Lich stated with a sigh. These people stink, I don't want to eat them. The emoji suddenly said after sniffing on one of the corpses. Nobody asked you to eat them. We will leave 5 people to loot them. The rest of us will go to Hope. Seth said and signaled for the rest to keep going. The welcoming committee had already been a blast and the city was no disappointment either. At the gate, they met a bunch of crooks, armed to the teeth and ready to aggressively guard the sad excuse for a city gate. Mind you, not against monsters. Guard against beggars, refugees, and other bottom feeders without the monetary power to buy their way into the city. That was the main population of people that had built a shanty town at the foot of the wall. The guard at the front was badly shaven, dirty, and if Seth was not completely wrong, high. A crudely pieced together leather armor had a hard time restraining the man's obese body. Oh, wow. Look at this knob. You don't look like other trash that's been feeding off of crumbs in the ruins. What do you want here? The pig asked, snorted noisily, and spat on the ground. Seth understood immediately how to speak with this species. How much is the entry fee? Seth asked coldly. Haha. Getting right to the point. I like that. The pig looked up and down Seth, who had not bothered to hide his armor. Although the guard probably lacked a specific skill, a discerning eye could easily spot the armor's worth. For you? 50 silver. And another 10 for each of the funny bunch behind you. Funny bunch, the chimera stuttered disbelieving. Seth didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. The man wanted 2 gold from him. Laugh because the man thought it was much, while it was mere poultry to Seth. Or cry because it was a fortune, especially for the people of this shanty town. No wonder none of them could get it, with these kinds of arbitrary fees. It was nothing to Seth, but if he just paid it, he would be seen as a pushover and the business in the city would get a lot more annoying. He spoke from actual experience. He had to learn it the hard way and got majorly berated by Finn during their journey to Aura. 20 silver for all of us, he spoke with the voice of Seth. The cut was so hard that even the fat guard somehow resisted the persuading effect. He had just inhaled when Seth interrupted him. Don't misunderstand. I am paying this money for the both of us. You can stay alive, and I don't have to deal with the bullshit that comes with slaughtering the guard and blowing a hole in the city wall. Got it? Not if you understand. The guard's bowels audibly moved when the very real option of death became a possibility. The man was completely convinced that the man was not only serious but also capable of this threat. Any word he wanted to say was stuck and he nodded mechanically. Seth dropped 20 silver coins in his hand, and they walked past him and his colleagues. Upon entering the city, there was no big change. Between the old buildings continued the same shanty town as outside the walls. Every free place was filled with ramshackle living space, leaving only narrow roads where people walked in a tight crowd. Beggars, peddlers, sorry figures could be seen everywhere. From old men selling stuff at street stalls to shacks that doubled as a dealer or drug den. They should really consider changing the name to something more fitting. Like landfill or despair, Seth commented. The greatest change was probably the smell. It was a terrible stench. It smelled as if the sludge of decades was rising from the derelict sewers below. Maybe the only good part of this city was that really nobody cared. Seth was sure that the chimeras would pull a lot of attention on the streets of Y City and even in Delta. Not here, though. Among the crowd were people and mutations that looked even worse than any of the chimeras. There was no telling how these people ended up the way they were, but nobody even spared a weird glance for the pieced-together members of their party. It might be the experiments of some jobs along the lines of black magicians. Al theorized, but nothing was for sure. Pip's sad expression spoke volumes. The place had become even worse than she remembered. You really don't know where we could find someone? Seth asked again, just to make sure. I'm sorry. Things have changed too much. I am unsure if there even was someone like that back then. This meant they could only look for information themselves. At first, they stayed together and kept their eyes peeled for merchants that would sell the amounts of rations they needed. This did not really work. The only industries that were obviously striving in this place were the oldest business in the world and the second oldest. Prostitution and drugs were everyone here. Maybe you could talk with the current boss? I don't know who we could ask. Pip finally said after they had looked for some time without results. She was forced to speak up because she was against splitting the group to search for info. Seth also did not like the idea of letting these people bumble around in this kind of place. Half of them were chimeras without an idea of people, the other half was not much better in this environment. Pip took the lead and the group followed her through the city. At times she had trouble finding the way, but they ended up in a better area of the city. Finally, Pip stopped in front of what used to be a nightclub. The neon lights and electricity were still working, and they even heard music from outside. According to Pip, this was a pub/nightclub, a brothel, and a casino at once. It was run by a man called Corvo. She grimaced when saying the name, but according to her, this was the man they needed to talk to. The best source of information that could be bought for money. Though her past with the man seemed not very positive. Seth decided to enter with Pip and the Chimera leader. The bumper did not stop when they entered the place. The buildings inside had a quite intriguing design. The ground floor they entered was a pub, but it was filled with loud music. It was because it was actually a balcony above the nightclub. The floor was missing for the biggest part, and a dancing crowd filled what would have been the basement. Inside, Pip took the lead. She went to the counter and signaled for the barkeep to lend her an ear. They whispered something to him, but the man shook his head. Sorry, Pip. But that is the old code. I can't let you in like this. But it would be a really big business for Corvo, she argued desperately. Pip, you know that the boss won't meet just anybody, he answered awkwardly. Hey, who are you calling a just anyone? Seth suddenly stepped in. He simply sat down and leaned on the counter. Ah, Seth. Please wait, I can deal with this. Pip assured. Don't worry about it, I just wanted to taste what kind of piss they serve in such a rat hole. HOH? Pip, you brought quite the cocky friend. At least you look like you can afford something better than piss. Then give me your best stuff, and we will see. With a laugh, the barkeeper took a nondescriptive bottle from a cabinet in the back and filled a glass for Seth. The blacksmith did not drink yet and turned to Pip. So? Did he pour me something good, or piss? She looked nervous back and forth between Seth and the barkeeper but finally said. The latter. He likes to prank people with his actual pee. It smells like pee, it looks like pee. I don't have to taste it to know that it's piss. You are right. Now then, you look thirsty. Why don't you have a drink? Seth suddenly offered it to the barkeep. The way he said it gave Pip goosebumps, but what creeped her out, even more, was that the barkeeper took the offer. Chapter 344. Snake Oiling. The barkeeper had chosen his own punishment. The man was only level 11. Considering the difference in level and stats, Seth could easily give him simple commands when he focused on him. The man did not even show an ounce of discontent as he lifted the glass and chugged his own urine. He acted as if this was his own choice. How about you give me your best drink, now? On the house, of course. Seth said after the man was done forcing it down. Sure. The barkeeper nodded and brought out a fresh glass and a fancy-looking bottle. The alcohol was very fragrant. This stuff is even oozing mana. The pocket lich commented when Seth took a whiff of it. Just a swig told Seth that the alcohol had a similar effect to a weak mana potion. It might even have a strengthening effect on people of a lower level. This gave Seth an idea, and he ordered a second glass before summoning the emoji. Didn't dragons in stories also often have a taste for alcoholic beverages? Maybe it could have an effect on the chubby snake. I don't wanna. It smells weird. Come on. Just take a sip. I promise it won't taste bad. Mo, fine. The tiny, forked tongue shot into the glass to get a taste. Again and again, finally, the emoji started strangling the glass and drinking in big gulps until it was empty. Another. It said and shoved its glass off the counter, smashing it on the ground. Another, Seth ordered, and the second glass was filled. In the end, the little child emptied the whole bottle, after which it took a drunk nap. It was not without effect. The emoji's mana had increased by 30 points. It was not much, but also not little. How about you let me meet your boss now? Seth finally said to the barkeeper. That won't be necessary. I have seen everything, someone said. The man speaking wore a luxurious black mantle over a stylish black suit. Looking like a mobster from a different century, he was coming down the stairs from one of the upper floors. You have quite nerve to play with my bartender like this, he said, and fixed his slicked back hair. It was a pale, attractive man with raven black hair and a scar from the left side of his mouth, down to the jawline. Pip looked at the man with shock and fear. Well, well, well. If it isn't my little Pip. Was the world not nice to you after you finally managed to run away? Are you back to reattach the leash after you found out that the world outside is no better than what we have here? He said sardonically. He kept approaching the little girl threateningly with a complacent smile. It would have been a serious scene if somebody had not broken out in laughter right beside the little girl. Pip and Corvo looked at him in confusion. Corvo became angry and the girl panicked a little. What are you even saying? This place is as good as it gets? You know nothing, he finally said after recovering from his fit of laughter. Also, how come you ignore me the moment you see an old flame? Hey! Seth stood and squared off with Corvo, who was almost 10 centimeters shorter. Am I not interesting enough to distract you from a little girl? I even pulled off some awesome mind tricks, and you dropped me the moment you saw Pip. I feel a little hurt, you know. Seth grinned. Corvo had not realized when, but Seth had moved in between him and Pip. When had the man, with his confident smile, gotten so close? A heavy, gloved hand landed on his shoulder. The businessman was in the mid-leve 50s himself, but this hand felt incredibly heavy, and when it grasped his shoulder it was like a vice. I have a business to talk about with you, Seth said seriously. The blacksmith knew that this man was some kind of big shot, otherwise, he would not have swaggered out so confidently. There probably was also some complicated history with Pip, or even a trauma for her. But Seth did not care. He interrupted their little villain and former victim play. The two could work out the dynamic of their relationship sometime else if it was that important. Seth was not here for fun or someone else's character development. Ah, sure. Let's go to my office. Corvo answered, a little confused. Corvo only came back to his senses after he sat down in his chair behind his desk, with the man, Pip, and that weird four-armed lady sitting opposite him. What do you want from me? The nightclub owner asked suspiciously and fixated the three. Well, try to guess, Seth said. He wanted to see whether this man was worth his money. The information on the caravan couldn't be a secret after what had happened. Are you from that caravan? Don't tell me that you are the guy who fobbed the guard off with 20 silvers. Corvo asked after a moment of silence. He even knew about what happened at the gate. It seemed that it was a good idea to take Pip along, after all. Looks like this will be worth my time. We want to restock our food and supplies at this place. Enough for 3 weeks and roughly 400 people. Who do I have to talk to about this, and what is the expected price? Seth did not beat around the bush. It was Corvo's turn to break out into hearty laughter. No merchant in this city could provide this much food. Even a bigger gang would not be able to accumulate that much. Maybe Big Dave, but he won't give you any of his private stash, he said dismissively. Big Dave. Big Dave. The kingpin of hope, you don't intend to. I would like to meet Big Dave. How do I make an appointment? One does not simply make an appointment with Big Dave. Unless you have something he wants, and can't simply take it from you, there is no way he will meet anyone personally. I see. Do you have a way to disseminate some information in a way he will come to know about it? A few hours later. Is this information trustworthy? The big man asked. He was talking to a subordinate that was kneeling in front of his mighty desk. The big office was tinged by the light of the sinking sun. Through the big windows all around, one could look down at all of the surrounding city within the walls. Yes, sir. It comes from a high-level appraiser who can even identify rare items. It is definitely an item of at least epic rating. And the guy who has it? Inconclusive, but our lookouts said he seems to have weird powers and the group he travels with is not to be underestimated. I want to meet him. Arrange a meeting. Yes, sir. The dark figure vanished from the office, leaving the big boss alone in the dimming office. Switch on the light on your way out, will ya? There was no answer, but the light turned on after a short silence. Chapter 345. Dealing with Evil. Did you really make an epic item just like that? Corvo asked in disbelief. You heard the appraiser, right? Are you sure Big Dave will get the info? Of course, nothing of value happens without Big Dave knowing of it. Are you sure you want to use an epic-rated item to bargain with him? You would have to fight the whole city if you try to get it back. Oh, don't worry. He can have this all to himself. Seth told him with a smug smile. The smile had a few separate reasons. One was that his goldsmith had finally reached the craftsman tier. That alone was a big source of joy for Seth. The others had to do with what made it possible. The blacksmith had made a necklace. However, it was not an epic item, but actually, relic rated. An unexpected turn of events, really. Obviously, Seth did not intend to give the kingpin of this landfill anything nice. After visiting the appraiser, the party had checked in at a simple hotel. The rooms were clean. The furniture was old and outdated but in good condition. Pip fell asleep as if the beds were pure luxury while the rest stayed up and waited. There was a knocking late at night. It was as Corvo had said, it only took a few hours for a messenger to arrive with an invitation. How did they know where the party stayed? As Corvo mentioned, the kingpin seemed to really know a lot, if not everything. Big Dave wished to invite them for dinner at his private restaurant in the central tower. The messenger was polite on the surface, but it was clear that this was a decree to show up, not a simple invitation. They had heard that Seth was looking to liquefy his assets to buy rations for his caravan and they would be willing to talk about this business. Without a question, Seth agreed immediately. They took the bait was a thought both parties shared but it was still unclear who would have the last laugh. Seth sent some of his entourage back to the caravan's camp to inform them of their stay at the city. The dinner invitation was for the evening, so they still had some time. The blacksmith used it to scout a little more of the city. The nightclub and their inn were actually part of a better area if one could call that. At least it looked like a normal ghetto you would expect in a big city and not a wobbly shanty town like the slums. Walking around they took a look at the place of the big boss, where they would soon dine with the head honcho. Big Dave's building, or the Dave Tower as the kingpin called it, was in the better area. This place looked almost normal with well-maintained houses and skyscrapers. It was home to the rich people of Hope. Rich meant that most of them were gangsters that sucked the lifeblood out of the normal populace of the city. The blacksmith had hoped to find something interesting if he kept exploring. But all he found was a disappointment. Hope was really hopeless. Especially the ruins beyond the wall. He heard that a lot of refugees were fighting for their lives over there. It was the only place in the plains where dungeons spawned. While those within the walls would be immediately closed, those outside were only marginally kept in check. There was no guild here, after all. Although it cost some poor people their lives, letting the dungeons outside the walls break had a bigger strategic advantage for the bandits and gangsters. Pip had once fled from this place, but her painful expression as they explored the place showed that she still held a deep attachment to it in her heart. Her sorrow grew with every bit of information they found. Finally, Seth could not ignore it any longer, so he sat down with her on a bench. "You are still attached to this place, right?" he asked. The girl only looked away and nodded. She seemed to be a little embarrassed. This city had treated her like shit, but she could still not really cut her ties with it. "Why? I grew up here, with my parents. Back then I didn't like it here at all. But, when all this happened when my parents were, I realized how great it was. My time with Karina made me realize much I long for that time to come back. Seeing Hope in this state She fell silent. Seth waited for her to continue as tears started flowing. "I want to bring back that time. That place where everyone was so disgustingly optimistic. The place where everyone was so aggressive, friendly and helpful. I want my home back. But I know. What can a weak girl like me change? I am not strong enough to change anything. I never am," she cried. It finally broke out of her, and she kept babbling on about how it was and how it should be. The blacksmith simply listened and pet her back. Until finally. "See, can't you help me? You are strong. I am sure you could." "No, Pip. Complex problems need complex solutions. I am not the man for that job. To fix this you don't only need power. You need time and dedication. I am not willing to invest. I am not the one who will solve all your problems." He struck down that glimmer of hope. "Is there even anyone who can?" she asked dejectedly. She had become gloomy again. "At the present, no. But I will offer you the same I did on the day when we first met. I will take you in and I will help you become strong. And then there will be someone to solve all your problems. You will solve them. You won't need to ask anyone for help." "Do you really think I can?" "Sure. That is the special thing about the system. Even if you have no luck, as long as you are willing to grind, you can become someone strong. And with some fortune, like say meeting an awesome blacksmith, you can definitely reach the top," he said nonchalantly. Pip looked askant at him but ended up hugging him tightly. "Thank you. It's okay. How about you go to the others, I will sit here for a moment." Once the young girl was gone, Seth took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. He was drenched in sweat. He had tried to sound wise and experienced, but heck, he had no idea what he was supposed to do. Was this good advice or not? Of course, he cared about her and didn't want to hurt her feelings. But heck, he just didn't want to deal with this chaotic pile of shite. In his opinion, it was best if she just forgot this place and found a new home in Minas March. Well, if she didn't, then they would have a branch of Minas Mar in this place. As long as he did not have to deal with it, he would not mind. Again, he realized that he really was not good at dealing with people. He calmed down and collected his thoughts before joining the others. He did not know whether it was good advice, but at least Pip seemed happier overall. In the evening, Seth and 4 of the warriors went to Dave Tower for their dinner with the big boss. The Chimeras and their leader stayed behind with Pip. They were greeted politely at the entrance of the tower and escorted to the restaurant on the 30th floor. What surprised Seth was that they managed to keep these ancient elevators running. Like most things in this city, the restaurant had the style of a different century. This did not mean it was not luxurious in its own way. "Please have a seat. The dinner will be served soon. The host will also join you shortly." They waited and soon Big Dave entered the restaurant. He wore an antiquated smoking jacket and a fedora, looking like a true mobster. The man inside the suit was wider than he was tall, but his mass did not give the impression of obesity. The man possessed the gravity of power and confidence. One could easily understand why he was the big boss of this place. "Greetings, Mr. Smith. I am glad you could make it. The honor is all mine." They greeted each other politely but did not talk any further as the food was finally served. The meal started very normally as both ate slowly and moderately. However, soon they realized that this was the first battle of the night and their speed picked up. Dave prided himself in his mighty stomach, but it had been a long time since Seth had the chance to really eat to his heart's content. The battle of giants raged until deep into the night. Dishes towered, bowls rolled, and even a few forks lost their lives in the skirmish for the turkey. Borders were crossed, cheese plates decimated. Innocent dumplings had no chance to run for their lives. The first battle of the night ended in a draw. The only loser was the chef who had kept cooking for 6 hours straight. "I see you are a worthy business partner. Let's go to my office and talk," Dave finally said and heaved himself off his chair. The opponents wobbled into the elevator together with the guard. The elevator creaked threateningly as they rose to higher floors. With big sighs they sat down on opposite sides of the big desk inside the office. It was time to make a deal with evil. Chapter 346. Dealing with Evil, 2. "I was told that you wish to sell an item, a very precious item." Dave cut right to the case. "Yes. It is an epic-rated necklace. Unfortunately, there is no appraiser in this place that can back my information." Seth sighed disappointedly. "Of course, that is a problem. But it can be easily solved once someone wears it and confirms its effectiveness." "What can it do, again?" Dave said, understanding. "One of the options is the problem. Once someone equips it, it will be soul-bound to that person. At that point, nobody can take it back or steal it. Even if that person dies, the items will be useless. Other than that, it increases the strength and agility of the wearer by 50, mana by 300, and grants a passive skill called Strengthening. Dave smiled understandingly, but it was actually a smug smile. Originally, he wanted to use a test to simply steal the item while pushing the blame on a third party. Now, as long as he could get his hand on the item, there was no getting it back from him. Could I see the item? He asked excitedly. One had to know that as someone with a level of 64, the big boss of Hope already owned some epic-rated items from dungeon raids. However, jewelry drops were rare in general and those with a higher rating almost non-existent. Respectively big was his greed for such an item. Of course, but first I would like to know whether you can pay my price. I would not have invited you, if I couldn't. 3 weeks of rations for an expedition of over 400 people, right? It is stored in the basement. Dave suppressed his laughter. The price was fair, yes. But who would really pay that much for a necklace? The moment he got his hand on it, his boys would take care of this man and his caravan. He could only blame himself for treasuring a jade ring. I am sorry, if this may sound rude. But can I see it? Once I am sure you can pay, I do not mind to commence the trade, the young asked warily. Of course, let's go. Business should never be left waiting. Dave said happily. He and his cronies led the caravan leader back to the elevator and drove down to the basement. This was the private storage of Big Dave. The place they left the elevator had been an underground parking lot. Now, it was filled with wooden barrels and bags all the way to the ceiling. These are bags of flour, potatoes, and rice. The barrels contain fruits and pickled fish. This should be enough to feed 400 people for 3 to 4 weeks. Are you really willing to trade all of this for a single pendant? The young man asked, intimidated by the mass of goods. I am a man of my word. All of this, in exchange for an epic item, is more than fair, he said with a wolfish grin behind the man's back. Great! Seth exclaimed and finally brought out a small box. I am satisfied with this deal. It will take a while to store all the rations. I will give you this in advance, so you can assure yourself of its power, he said with a big smile. The blacksmith opened the lid and showed it to Big Dave, unable to hide his more than satisfied smile. The big man immediately grabbed the pendant from the box and started laughing maniacally. You do nothing of the sort, you fool. Get him, men. Oh no, what are you doing? Seth played shocked as he was pushed back by the crime lord's bodyguards. Ha ha ha. Nobody will come to help you. You can only blame your own naivety. Dave said and put on the pendant while Seth fought off the attacks of his henchmen. When he put it on, the necklace actually sunk into his skin and turned into a tattoo that could not be taken off. I can feel it. The power. Yes. Dave said and laughed. He laughed so much that Seth got really confused. Was he really that happy about the necklace? Seth had made many rare items with a higher performance than the necklace. Was Dave just mentally ill? Seth just fended off the guard's vain attempt to subdue him as he waited. Soon enough, the hysteric laughter turned into gasping and wheezing. A knowing smile appeared on the blacksmith's face. The whimsical curse had found its new owner. Whimsical curse. Relic. Durability, 3500. 1 curse of binding. 2 passive skill, strengthening. 3 passive skill, whimsical power. 4 plus 25 strength. 5 plus 300 mana. A terrifying pendant and necklace created by the maleficent hands of craftsman Smith. Created with an amalgamation of superior craftsmanship and mysterious techniques, it is a work of pure malicious intent. If the notoriety of the pendant grows in the future, it may evolve into a legendary item. Truly, a piece of jewelry one would not wish to wear. The materials Seth used were another reason for his good mood back when he finished it. The curse of binding had the effect that the user would be unable to take off the item until it broke. This effect came from a ring that was originally made for the chainmail made from the bones of Seth. This curse was the manifestation of the material's random effects. The passive strengthening skill had a similar origin. During his experiments with volatile zinc, he had made a small bar of a unique material called feeding brass. The material inherently ate away at the life force of anyone and anything it touched. Seth coupled this with the blood drinker ballad, which created the passive skill that would constantly eat away at the wearer's life to repair and increase the durability of the item. This meant it could virtually not be broken, unless someone managed to destroy it in one attack. Whimsical power influenced the amount of life the necklace would drain from the wearer. This was a weird effect that came into existence, because Seth wanted to see what the ego souls of the monkeys would do. He had even fused some of the confused and resentful monkey souls for this, turning them even more vengeful and deranged. The wilder and unhappy the apes were, the more life would be drained while it would lessen if they were calm. How to calm a bunch of vengeful monkey souls that were shoved into an item? Who even knew something like that? Seth didn't. Seth threw in the increase in strength, so the wearer would be fooled by the initial boost in strength, and not immediately notice his life draining away. Even if someone had a high health regeneration, at best it would cancel out the effect. The best part was that all effects complemented each other in killing the wearer. One needed to break the item to save the own life. But this would upset the monkeys and the item would grow stronger and repair itself by draining away even more life. The perfect vicious circle. Seeing the item work as intended, Seth did not waste much time to disable the men attacking him. Then he approached their boss who was desperately trying to take off the necklace again. What have you done to me? Dave, the voluminous man Seth had met just a few hours ago, already started to look sickly and aged as he drank health potions like water. What have I done? Seth blinked in confusion. Then he showed him a big smile. You can only blame your own naivety, was it? Actually, you made a good deal, really. This item is actually relic rated. It is even better than an epic item, he told him before he turned to the storage. Seth calmly started storing the rations in his inventory while Dave was holding on for dear life in his hopeless fight against his new item. At least the gangster had not lied. Here was more than enough stuff to feed the caravan for a while. It took a while for him to loot the place clean and store all the stuff. It filled 10 of his inventory slots and Seth was really glad that he had more than enough after completing the system quest so often. When he was done, he turned to leave. Surprised, he found Dave had already turned into a desiccated old man. Please. Save me. He whispered, barely able to reach out his hand to Seth. This was odd. The blacksmith was sure that the item was not this strong. How had a big man like Dave turned into this over the span of just half an hour? Before Seth had the chance to deny the man his help, the man died. His eyes became murky and the reached-out arm fell limp. Finally, the corpse crumbled to dust. Seth did not want to touch the ashes, but he managed to fish out the whimsical curse, and the small black item box. The item box held a couple hundred gold, a couple hundred silver and several thousand bronze coins. This man had been loaded. As you would expect from someone leeching off a whole city. There was nothing noteworthy besides the money. Some of the items could be distributed to the caravan members, but that was all. The bigger surprise came when he checked the necklace. Whimsical curse. Relic. Durability, 5100. 1 curse of binding. 2 passive skill, strengthening. 3 passive skill, whimsical power. 4 plus 30 strength. 5 plus 400 mana. A terrifying pendant and necklace created by the maleficent hands of craftsman Smith. Created with an amalgamation of superior craftsmanship and mysterious techniques, it is a work of pure malicious intent. If the notoriety of the pendant grows in the future, it may evolve into a legendary item. The durability had made a huge jump, but the weird part was that the mana and additional strength had increased. You probably underestimated the brass, Al commented. After realizing what that meant, Seth hurriedly put the necklace away. If he had really miscalculated the power of the brass, then this necklace was a lot more terrifying than he had initially thought. As it sucked away the life force, it did not only strengthen the durability of the item but also its effects. This included the strength of the life drain. A life drain that would constantly become stronger by draining life. Chapter 347. Worse than children. Seth wore the helm of Hades and left the underground garage that only had the unconscious guards left on the floor. It would have been suspicious to use the elevator while invisible, so Seth saw himself forced to use the stairs. When he reached the lobby, he hesitated for a moment but decided against leaving them a little present. Pip seemed sentimental about this rat hole. She might get angry if he burned down the city accidentally. Reaching their inn, he found the Chimera leader and her people surrounded by a bunch of burned and lifeless bodies. Was this what Dave meant when he said that nobody would come to help him? Any injuries? None. The fight was a joke, she said dismissively. Okay. We are returning to the caravan tonight. Tonight. Right now, to be exact. Our business here is over. Did you get the rations already? Yep. Get everyone ready for departure. Seth hurried them to return. He had a queasy feeling in his stomach. The lights of spells could easily be seen in the darkness of the night. They had just left the gate and were already able to see the signs of battle in the distance. Why was it that every time he left, these people managed to get in trouble. They were worse than children. When the guard tried to stop them, they were quickly dispatched by dragon might. They would have been faster if Seth had not left Puffles with the caravan, but seeing what was going on, he was glad he had left him. As the group got closer, the others were finally able to also see what their allies were fighting. The scene Seth had already seen from the gates was worse than he thought, but not as bad as it could have been. He was sure now, this was what Dave had meant. The ground surrounding the camp was littered with giant sheep corpses. While many were still in the middle of fighting these furry fiends, others were hard-pressed in distracting their owners. Giants. Somehow somebody had managed to lure them to the campgrounds of the caravan and a fight had broken out. The strongest adventurers like Elsa, Marcel, and the archer had split into half a dozen parties that were fighting just as many giants. Toho had turned into a giant tiger and distracted another. Another two giants were busy preventing two giant boas from strangling them to death. Evan was really shining at this moment. Especially after his training in the swamp. There were not just the two giant titanoboas. After increasing his level, the number of summons he could bring out at once had also increased. Besides strangling a giant, he was also protecting a big part of the non-combatants. Of course, none of them could compete with Puffles. His kill count had already climbed to 3. The corpses of the giants on the ground were mutilated by the flying centipede's razor-sharp legs and sickle arms. They also had fist-sized burn holes that penetrated their bodies like gun wounds. The giants the Ivisor kept in check did not look much better than their fallen comrades. It was a wonder that they were still able to walk. They did not just walk, but they furiously tried to smack the nightmare centipede out of the air with their hands and clubs. Unsuccessfully. With the group's arrival, fire lances and lightning strikes joined the fight against the giants. Thanks to Puffles picking them off one by one, they already had a hard time fighting the caravan. Now another two powerhouses and a group of fighters joined. Against popular belief, giants were not stupid. The biggest of them cried out loud and they suddenly ceased to fight. They scrambled to assemble around their leader, who was covered in bloody wounds from Puffles' attack. The caravan forces halted their action, confused by their opponent's sudden retreat. Vigilantly they watched the giant's every move. Suddenly, they knelt on the ground. The leader had stepped forward and sank to his knees. The rest followed his example. Even the aggressive herd of giant sheep pulled back. Puff! Stop attacking them for now. With his call, the Ivisor flew over and elegantly landed in the campgrounds. Be careful. These guys have a really tough hide. Even though the Great Me can fight them, you might have some problems. The Ivisor said smugly. But it was obvious that it was just its ego talking. Even the nightmare centipede had a hard time against the group of giants and seemed quite exhausted now. Seth, you are finally back. Marcel greeted the blacksmith as he stepped up beside him. Yeah, what happened? I have no idea, really. We were just getting ready for the night before the herd of sheep suddenly came upon us like a tsunami. The giants followed closely behind the sheep. It's good you were able to hold out this long. Any casualties? Many injured but no casualties. Fortunately, Puffles was here or we might have been wiped out. Seth nodded and then stepped out of the crowd of travelers to come before the kneeling giant. The right half of its face was a mess but the remaining eye focused on the blacksmith. Was that hope he saw in the giant's eye? This guy was actually glad to see him. Why did you attack my caravan? Seth asked. He simply relied on his universal translation to do its work. Some sheep dead. Town people say you killed sheep. We come for revenge. But you strong. We sorry. Please mercy. They lied, we did not touch your sheep. With great sorrow, the giant's gaze wandered over his dead brother and animals. We even more sorry. Please mercy, he smashed his forehead on the ground and begged for their lives. Seeing a few giants between 35 and 40 meters kneel in front of him made Seth feel unbelievably powerful. It hit him. What was cooler than giant snake mounts? Giants. No, scratch that. When Seth imagines riding on the shoulder of a giant into battle, he found the thought silly. Still, having these guys as allies could be really cool. We need to discuss that for a moment. He made the giant wait and returned to the crowd. Seth turned to Toho, Marcel, and the other leaders. They are asking for mercy. It seems that the attack was a misunderstanding. What do you think? They have lost more than us in this battle. I believe it would be acceptable to show them mercy. Not forgiveness, but mercy. Toho was the first to speak up. The others more or less agreed with the wise tiger man. After their little council, Seth returned to the giant, who was still pressing his forehead on the ground. "We will spare your life. In exchange, we will take all the corpses on the battlefield with us and..." Seth turned back to look at the people behind him. "Pip, come here. You have to swear allegiance to me and this girl. In a few years, she will return. At that time, you have to work with her to fulfill her goals. Deal?" "Yes, benefactor." Urbach agrees. "Tribe will stand with benefactor and tiny female," the giant leader Urbach exclaimed, relieved. The blacksmith would have loved to have these guys at Minas Mar, but the logistics were too much of a heatage. The way to Delta was still long and he didn't want to worry about feeding the giants and their herd. He decided it was better to leave them here for later use. Seth was sure they would be a great help when Pip decided to take over found a branch office of Minas Mar in Hope. It was an investment in future possibilities. Pip still seemed confused and unable to process what had just happened. "Okay, everyone. I know you had a rough time, but get ready for the night. We will depart tomorrow." Thanks to Seth going back to everyday duties, the people finally realized that the crisis had ended just like this. Sighs of relief and cheers could be heard before people got back to rebuilding and cleaning the campground. While the sheep were added to the caravan's ration, the giants ended up in Seth's inventory. Giants had a natural resistance to magic and physical attack. Their hide was one of the toughest leathers one could acquire. It was like the discount version of dragon scales. He was quite happy with the loot. It was just a shame that he did not gain any souls from this. He would have liked to get a giant's soul, but he could hardly kill someone who had surrendered, just for that. The giants didn't deserve such treatment in his opinion. They were kind of cute, in their own way. Chapter 348. Staying behind. Early in the morning, the Chimera leader approached him during breakfast. "Oh, leader. It's rare for you to approach me on your own. What's up?" "I came with an important matter. Also, please call me by my name." "Name? You finally decided?" Seth asked in surprise. Since the Chimeras had no memories of their previous life, they obviously had no name. They chose their new names themselves, but their leader was one of the few that had still waited with the decision. Until now. "Yes. Please call me Azul," she said with a smile. "Congratulations, Azul. Was that the important matter?" She smiled when he naturally used her name. "No, it isn't. I came to inform you that many of our people would like to stay here." "Are you sure?" "Yes, those who traveled with you retold what happened and described the city to the others. Many would like to stay." This came as a surprise to Seth, but not utterly unexpected. At the beginning of their journey, Seth had expected to leave many of the former slaves in Hope. They had not known what a shithole this place was at that point. After what happened with the angels, there were not many freed slaves left that could stay here. After seeing the city, himself, the blacksmith had also given up on simply leaving them here. These people did not have the system. People like the slaves or Linri would need to visit a system church to join the system, as they came from a world outside of its reach. There were no churches in Hope. These people would be helpless in this landfill of a city. He had expected for people to stay here, but it was a surprise that someone decided to stay after seeing the place firsthand. On the other hand, maybe the Chimeras would fare better here than in human society. From what he saw, they were good people but rather rough. They might get into trouble in the big city. A city like Hope might be the place for them to bloom. "Are you staying, too?" Azul looked at him in surprise. "No, I and some others decided to stay in the caravan and follow you." "Are you really going to just let them stay here?" "It's not like I can stop them. I mean, I could. But why would I? I am just glad that you wish to follow me," he said with a smile. "Still, let me meet those that want to stay. I will have to talk to them before we leave." "Ah, sure." The one she led him to was the second in command of the Chimeras. There was a split among them. One side did not wish to travel any further. After they heard what the city was like, they felt that they would have a better life here than when they stayed on the move. Their opinion matched Seth's thoughts. It was an environment where the strong strived and even the augmented were treated normally. Seth was not that involved with the general members of the caravan, but it seemed that the Chimeras had experienced their fair share of human society through the eyes of the slaves and warriors. Even the adventurers did not cover themselves in glory. The ones wishing to stay were those with the worst experiences of human interaction. Seth could not deny their fears and he could not guarantee that Delta would treat them better. The vice leader stepped before him. It was a huge humanoid male. He had the torso of a human and the arms of some kind of gorilla beast. He stood at 2,30 and easily towered over Seth. The height came from his long, backward bent legs. Nevertheless, Seth could see him shake as he tried to act confidently in front of him. "See, caravan leader, did you come to stop us?" he stuttered at first, but the rest of the sentence seemed to be practiced well. "No, don't worry. I understand your reasons. I just wanted to have a short chat with you." Since he was the one who had freed the chimeras, he felt somewhat responsible for them. Because of that, he wanted to leave them some advice. He did not want to see them turn into inhumane tyrants after all. He gave them a full sermon on morals. Well, his own take on it at least. He also made them take the same oath as the giant. To help Pip in her goals, when she returned here one day. After dealing with the deserters, the caravan got back on their way. A few days later, the mounts were nearing their limits as the rescue forces hurried to the west. It had been 3 weeks since they departed from Gamma and bad news kept pouring in. Leona got the messages via a communication crystal. At first, there was a wave of adventurers that returned and reported of a living forest of darkness that tried to take their lives. From their statement and with Simon's confirmations, it became clear that the corruption had spread quickly after the theocracy had fallen. Previously, it was the Starta village that had staved off the darkness and the growth of the forest. They calmed down when a messenger returned and told them that they had successfully overcome the terrifying forest. However, he was unable to give an understandable report about what exactly happened. Something about a rain of fire and a desert of ashes. It sounded very cryptic and hard to understand. The priest reported to the princess only that the caravan had overcome the danger. Had they reported about the Sea of Fire, Mina and the other would have had an inkling about who had stepped up to save them. Right now, they were in a hurry because of the latest news from the caravan. Just days after the messenger arrived and a wave of several hundred confused and heavily wounded adventurers arrived in Delta at roughly the same time. It took a while, but after they put their statements together, they concluded that the remaining forces of the theocracy had ambushed the caravan outside the forest. The current status was unknown, as no new messengers had been sent since then. This was the reason why Lena and the combined forces of the Empire, Y-City and Arjit Noor were in a constant hurry. Lena aimed for hope by traveling straight to the east. They knew about the city from the first messengers that were sent back. It had been a little more than a week since they last heard of the caravan and the mood slowly turned. Mark Baker and the general of Arjit Noor were rather pessimistic about the caravan's survival. Even the princess had her doubts, but she decided not to voice them. Finn and Yul Katzfer were adamant that they had to keep going. They would keep going, even if the leader decided that it was hopeless, and turned back. She didn't want to leave them, and especially Finn, behind. However, she would not have a choice if there were no life signs. "Don't think we will be able to keep going at this rate," Mike stated at the campfire. The rest of Yul Katzfer looked slightly depressed. "Yeah, the other leaders are putting pressure on the princess. It's not like I don't understand their point of view. Traveling across half a continent to pick up a bunch of cold bodies would be too much of an expenditure for them." Lixis stated. "You could have phrased it better, but yes. In times like this, humanitarian missions like the recovery of dead bodies don't have a high priority. We can be happy there even is a rescue mission." Bulko commented. "Hey! Don't be such a downer. We all know there is no way Seth would die to a bunch of religious nuts. Right, Mina?" Finn exclaimed confidently. "Right, even if the whole caravan is wiped out, there is no way Seth and Puffles would be among them." "Yeah, that guy never takes a fight he can't win," Mike joked. Mina nodded. "He's different from some kind of reckless brother who just jumps into battle and needs others to save his sorry ass when the opponent is too strong. That was only once. At least 3 times. Finn said. "Actually, it's 7. You only joined us recently." "You too, Bulko? Wait. You kept count," the bullied party leader exclaimed. "I mean, he has Alzalsar. There is hardly any fight he can lose if she is off cooldown." Lixis jumped in to save what was left of the tattered pride of their leader. "The point is, he is definitely out there. We can't give up." Finn concluded. "Report. It seems that the Allied forces are traveling west. They ride without a pause and will soon catch up to us." Those damn bastards! If only the theocracy had kept their promise. Those useless slavers, all incompetent, just like their god. Master, what shall we do? We won't be hunted down like some weak animal. This will end in one big fight. It's either them or us. Chapter 349. Backstab. It was a late evening and only the moon and stars illuminated the world. The Allied forces had stopped for the night to get some rest and look after their mounts. Mina, Finn, and some other women had found a tranquil little lake to take a bath. They had been weeks riding and had few chances to properly wash up. I really hope we get to Hope soon. It's the most likely place where he could be. You miss him almost as much as Finn does, hey? Is it that hard to hold back? The tiny fairy asked with a wolfish grin. It's not because of that. I really miss him. Mina said blushing. Oh, please. How long has it been? When was the last time? Finn kept teasing. The morning before the tournament's final, yet. Okay, I also miss his night duty. This is the longest break since. I can't remember, she said, embarrassed with her ear lowered in shame. Tehi, Finn knew it. Finn, she looked to the wood. Mina's ears perked up. A quiet cracking in the forest had alerted them. A peeper? Several? Instantly they had equipped their full gear. The other women were surprised at first, but quickly followed their example. Come out and we might spare your life. Finn's voice rang through the forest. It was incredibly clear and loud coming from such a small being. Kahik. I hoped a bunch of females would be easy targets to start with. Guess I was wrong? Good thing I came prepared, a deranged voice answered. What stepped out from the shadows surrounding the lake were not some peeping guys from their army. It was a human Zarkist and several enlightened ones. Hulking monsters of tumorous, distorted flesh, horn, hair, teeth, and claws. Damn! An ambush, many cursed when they saw the numbers. What about the rest of their company? Or did these monsters plan to pick them off first and bolster their numbers? Or maybe their intentions were of a more carnal nature. Many of these beasts were naked and shamelessly showed of their hardened crown jewels. Get them, the ugly humanoid shouted, and the hulking beasts rushed at the lake. Ugh, don't make me puke. Mina murmured before vanishing into the shadows. Although the defenders had a slightly higher number, the enemy troops were incredibly powerful and dangerous. Just a small scratch could turn them into the same thing. Kakik, don't hurt them too much. It won't be fun if you mangle them too much. But what if? Mangle one or two. It might be more fun than expect. Ugh. What? A clean silver-white sword had emerged from his chest. Heck, I don't mind being on the receiving end, but don't expect me to cry now, he made a lewd comment before collapsing. He wasn't as good in taking it from behind as he thought. You probably didn't expect to faint from a little backstab, eh? Mina said smugly and started chanting. The next moment the flesh beasts were bound by shadow chains. The other women did not hold back and started mincing their opponents. Once they were all turned into regeneration mush, Mina went around and stabbed each one with her shard of biting ice to destroy their souls. It was the only weapon currently able to kill the Zarkists. We have to get back and warn the main forces. Mina stated. They were all from different parties and ranks, but they all agreed with Mina and rushed back in a tight formation, wary of any more ambushes. They heard the noise of battle long before they reached the resting grounds. The lady group broke out from the underwood and could finally see what was going on. An army of twisted beasts was relentlessly attacking the Allied forces. Terrifyingly disfigured wolves and bears easily kept 5 to 10 people busy. However, deers, rabbits, foxes, birds, and other woodland creatures were no less dangerous as they quickly attacked people. All of them resembled the mutated beasts the Zarkists called the Enlightened. A sparrow-shaped mass of cancerous flesh dived at Mina but was quickly split in the air. It was an unprecedented crisis, as the Zarkists had never used beasts before. Shit! Are you telling me all of them are infectious? Someone among the ladies cursed. Get the undead to the front. Stay vigilant of the smaller beasts, they heard Lena's commands. The battle formations quickly shifted and the ladies used the chance to split and join up with their original parties and squads. The undead horde summoned by the necromancers of Arjit Noor became their meat shield. Although these infectious beasts were tricky, only a few were strong individually. Even low-level zombies could block the smaller ones' attacks. Mina and Finn joined Yulkat's Fur, who were currently protecting the princess. They ambushed Finn. These bastards, was the first thing Lena exclaimed when Mina gave her report. This isn't good. There might be other groups that got ambushed and turned. We need to be careful, she followed up with the demeanor of a commander. With the new formation, the Allied forces were able to push back the malignant woodland critters. Lena informed the other leaders about the possibility that they might have infected among them. Nevertheless, they did not get time to put up any measures as the situation on the battlefield changed. It started with a rumble in the distance, and moments later the small woods around them were flattened by mutated beasts. These were not the critters but mutated beasts and monsters from the pathworks and dungeons. Their number was smaller, but their strength was incomparable to the raffle before. Now the beasts were easily comparable to mini-bosses. Not only were they strong, but they were also extremely resilient and unkillable with normal means. On top of that were the smaller, more agile critters among them that were just as unkillable and infectious. This was simply unfair. At least in a normal situation. As the saying goes, never compete in numbers with a necromancer. A number of bone golems were raised to meet the beast in combat. While the undead kept the plague-ridden attackers in check, the people from Y City riddled them with holes from their exotic firearms. Once they were weakened, darkness would befall them and a pale flash of blade light would end their immortal lives. Even with the sudden change in tactics of Zarkists, to use infected beasts, the Allied forces were able to cope with minimum losses. However, they stayed vigilant. Other than the attack on the bathing women, there had been no other humanoid enemies. It was clear that they could attack at any moment. Having stabilized the situation, the leader could also focus their attention on observing their own people in case they had really been infiltrated. One by one the giant beasts fell and even the smaller fiends were laid to rest thanks to the hard work of the necromancers. And then, when the outcome was clear, the Zarkist monsters suddenly fled. This had never happened before. They simply ran. Even some among their own, people from every faction, seemed to have gone crazy and dashed away into the forest. Did something happen? Was this a trick? The soldiers paused warily. Nobody followed in case this was a trap. But for even the spies to have run off. What was going on? 5 minutes, 10, 30 minutes, they waited but nothing happened. Finally, they started tending to their own and quarantining the wounded. They could not risk their own to spread the magical disease. Those who had not received any direct wounds were okay, but those who were wounded by the beasts' claws, or teeth or any other direct way had a high chance to be infected. Many actually chose to take their own lives and have the necromancers purify their bodies. 2 hours later they were still heavily on guard but had turned to rest for now. Hey, do you see that? Someone suddenly called. At the horizon a black smoke column was rising high into the sky. Chapter 350. Champion of Zarkan. 3 hours earlier. What is up with these weird monsters? Yeah, they are disgusting. 2 chimeras on a scouting mission had encountered several rabid animals. Their distorted bodies were covered in fleshy growths. If they were not incredibly aggressive, they would have felt bad for the poor things. One was a man covered in crocodile leather and the lower body of a spider, the other was covered in fish scales and had tentacle arms. To an objective observer it would have been hard to say which side was the monster's, merely judged by appearance. They felt a little bad for these sick animals, but it was easy for the 2 chimeras to give them a quick mercy death. Faithfully the scouts reported the weird encounter on their return to the caravan. With the loss of half the chimeras, they had also lost roughly a third of their fighters. If these poor things had really contracted a terrible disease, they would need to be careful when protecting the weak former slaves. You didn't get hurt, right? Seth asked worriedly. Of course not, boss. Look at us. Wasn't this the reason we were chosen as scouts? Crocspider and Fishtopus flexed their bulging muscles covered in hard scale and skin. It was true, these 2 did not just exceed in strength, but also in defense. Do you know something about those things, boss? Fishtopus asked casually. Hey, show some respect. Azul scolded them. The chimeras had become awfully close with him ever since he accepted their fealty. On the other hand, it wasn't like Seth really minded it. He was a magnanimous own boss. The Zarkists? Marcel asked. Probably. Do we attack them? The guild leader asked worriedly. For the general populace of Delta, the Zarkists were like monsters from a horror movie. In an age, where monsters invaded from portals and dungeons, there were such terrifying creatures that lived among them. They were more terrifying to ordinary people than vampires. It only took a small scratch to become an animalistic monster that only followed its carnal desires. The fear of killing one's loved ones or doing even worse things to them. Even someone strong like Marcel was wary because the strange infection did not differentiate between weak or strong. Nobody wanted to become something like a Zarkist. Don't worry, I will scout them first. You guys wait here. Seth could barely contain his smile. Others were afraid of them, Seth loved them. Finding a group of Zarkist would be a great chance to farm a bunch of souls quickly. The blacksmith equipped the helm of Hades and followed the Chimera's directions. Mom, I thought of something. Seth stopped for a moment when the Imuji suddenly spoke up. It had been a while since it last spoke to him. He had been too occupied to give the little one as much attention as it needed. Maybe it became an introvert? What is it? Seth asked sweetly. I also want a name. A name. Right, Seth had never thought about giving the Imuji a name. The chubby snake was so much like Puffles that he thought it would also choose its name on its own. Yes, a name. The Chimeras all have one. Well, then why don't you choose one? The Chimeras chose them on their own because they have no mom. I have a mom. You are my mom. You should name me. It demanded confidently. Seth could hear the lich chuckling in the back of his mind. Literally, Al was transmitting silent chuckles through telepathy to tease him. A name. Yes, Mom. Let me think. Seth stalled for a time. This was terrible. He was not confident in his naming sense. He much preferred that Puffles gave himself that name instead of Seth giving it a bad one. On one hand, the name needed to be cool, but on the other, it couldn't be too edgy that it made people cringe when he called it. Or maybe he should go with a classic approach. How about Iggy? Short for Imuji. HNG. The snake's pouting was audible, and Seth could easily imagine its dissatisfied expression. PF. Haha. The lich did not bother to hold back his time. How about you give me some more time to choose a good one? Fine. Saved, for now. The caravan had left the Great Plain some time ago and entered a lightly forested area in the foot of a small mountain range. He was currently tracking up the mountain in the direction of a valley. Seth soon spotted some of the disfigured animals the scouts had talked about. Not just some, the whole forest was full of them. The further he went, the bigger they became. He could barely hold back his smile. To others, these ugly, slimy little beasts were a nightmare. A horror too terrible to even make a movie about. To Seth, they were really cute. Because each and every one of them was a soul he could collect with ease. He already had a plan. He would use soul trade with all the corrupted souls he could not use anyway, and depopulate the whole valley in one go. The only reason he didn't do it right away was that he first wanted to get a good idea of the situation. Although he didn't know when they started infecting other things than humanoids, it had to be a recent change. Otherwise, he would have heard about it before. This meant that somewhere in this place had to be actual Zarkists that infected these animals first. It was nothing personal, really. It was pure business. The last time he fought the Zarkists, most of them had medium-sized souls. Animal souls in big numbers were nice to have, but ordinary animals only had small souls in general. It was a hassle to fuse them. After getting his hands on several big souls, he had developed a taste for the big and juicy ones. His appreciation for the small souls had slightly lessened. Seth climbed on a big rock to get a better view of the valley and saw smoke in the distance. When he came closer, he saw it was a kind of army camp. If a chaotic mess of humanoids that were wildly fighting, feasting, and fornicating could be called an army. He tried to ignore the stuff that should be banned to the depths of the deep web and scanned the area. The only thing that resembled an actual camp on the clearing were the huge number of campfires in a big luxurious tent, surrounded by a circle of smaller tents. The blacksmith quickly concluded that the big one had to be the tent of the leader. He started to get excited. Not just because of the bunch of souls. It had been a while since the last time he met the followers of Zarkin, and his spirit capture had leveled up in the meantime. Now he could easily see the soul threads that chained their souls to the mortal plane. What got him excited was that all these threads led to this big tent in the center of the clearing. Many met at the smaller tents around it before meeting in the big one in the center. What did this mean? Seth had not just come across some small leader or priest. This was the champion of Zarkin and most likely a bunch of high priests. What was the whole clergy of Zarkin doing in the middle of nowhere? I never expected for the princess to be this capable. What do you mean? Isn't it obvious? This guy probably fled when he saw that he was losing the fight. Isn't that a little far-fetched? How would the princess overcome their immortality? Don't be so conceited. It's not like you are the only person in the world that can deal with souls. The lich scolded. Fine, fine. No matter why he is here. It's a windfall. I can't wait to see what soul he drops. The champion of a god was no small matter. Seth thought of the self-proclaimed adventurer king. Well, okay, it probably depended on the god and the champion. Someone like the chosen of Zarkan should be top tier. Then again, his soul might be tainted with divine power like those of the priests of the theocracy, which lowered its worth. Still, who wouldn't pick up a bunch of money, just because it was a little dirty, right? With this thought, he snuck into the camp to get a good look at this supervillain before taking his head. Chapter 351. Don't kill? Fine. It was harder than expected to get through the chaotic pile of bodies formed by the ordinary followers. Seth made very sure not to touch or shove anyone. Not just because he did not want to be found. He was really yucky. Even without touching anything, he wanted to take a shower. No, a long bath. A hot one that really burned of anything. Maybe he would just jump in a pool of lava, maybe that would make him feel clean again. Seth had left the caravan in the evening, and it was already dark when he reached the big tent in the center. The kind of relief he felt after finally getting past that place was unbelievably liberating. His only regret was that he had night vision. Even the darkness could not hide the horrors of this place. Decisively turning away from the place, he faced the big tent. It was the size of a circus tent, and the flaps of the entrance were heavily guarded. However, it was just a tent. There was no special material or magic protecting it. Seth simply poked a hole into it with one of his mass-produced soul piercers. It was silent, it was quick. It was undetectable. Who is there? Guards, the figure sitting in the center suddenly exclaimed. Damn! He had barely gotten a glance at the inside. How did they detect him? He was bummed by the failed attempt, but he did not panic. He was invisible after all. How were they supposed to find him? Actually, this was a chance. While the flap guardians ran into the tent, Seth patiently waited at the entrance. Soon more guards assembled and started inspecting the tent. They found the small hole. We found a small hole at the place you described, Your Highness. But we did not find the perpetrator. Go, find him. Search the camp. Yes, Your Highness. The guards left and started searching the campsite. Only 2 stayed behind at the flap, but it did not matter. Seth had long since snuck into the tent during the ruckus. Nobody noticed his presence and he had a long time to observe the inside. The walls inside the tent were covered in fleshy vines, like blood vessels and a sticky-looking membrane. The membrane was damaged where he poked the hole, that was probably how his presence was detected. In the middle of this network of vines sat Champion of Zarkan. He had not moved away even once during the conversation with the guards. Here he was surrounded by translucent screens that showed several situations from different points of view. Others were probably unable to see these, but Seth could. These screens were based on soul energy, the same as the chains that all united in the champion's chest. From what Seth could see, they had to be what his followers saw. This guy must have had a skill that let him use the followers like drones, to observe everything they did from far away. Some were live feeds of an ongoing battle. Ha, they are finally gone. Why can't I take care of business without getting disrupted? At least once, with that the imposing champion pulled down his pants and returned to choking the chicken. Seth couldn't kill a man during his private time. That was just rude. At closer inspection, he found that many screens were simply porn running on repeat. This guy was a true man of culture. He had such an imposing skill and used it for voyeurism. Zarkan was really the god of unbound carnal desires. The man did not even bother to dampen his grunting. The blacksmith wanted to let the man finish his last diddling and took time looking around as he was quite interested in this skill. Until he recognized what was running on one of the big screens in front of the wanker. It was the scene of a small lake full of women bathing. Something startled them and they all jumped up to equip their armor and get ready to fight. For just a moment they could be seen in all their glory before all kinds of armor covered them. One of them was Mina. Here he was giving the man the courtesy of the last FAP and this bastard. This. A moment later the champion's head rolled over the ground, detached from his body. Guards! Guards! Someone is here, the detached head screamed. Seth had used the draconic blade instead of something that would wound his soul. Now, this was personal. He did not feel like granting this man a slow and easy death. The guard, transformed into terrifying flesh giants covered in meat, armor plates, and bone spurs, rushed into the tent and found their bisected leader on the ground with his pants down. The head was already trying to reattach to the body. But they saw nobody other than their leader in a compromising position. First, he would grant this man despair. He would have done this anyway, but now he did it to hurt someone's feelings. A tsunami of fire erupted from Seth at the center and covered the whole campsite. This was Fire Wave, a spell from his gloves that was recently unlocked thanks to his level UPS. Strengthened by his equipment and trait as Kin of Fire, it laid waste to everything in the radius of 50 meters. The bloody vines, the membrane, and all other tents were burned away. Their inhabitants and the guard in the vicinity had turned into charred bodies that only slowly regenerated. The champion was also hit in the middle of reattaching his head, but the wave was nothing that would kill him or his followers. It was just to get rid of the tents. Seth wanted him to see what came next. The champion of Zarkan resisted the urge to cry out when the skin was burned off his body. So, what if the attacker was invisible and a strong magician? He could just come back, and the moment he gave him just so much as a scratch, he would join their ranks. He angrily concentrated on regenerating his neck and eyes, so he could fight, when he heard a droning chant right beside him. It even drowned out his own angry thoughts. The champion looked up and his healed eyes finally saw a dark figure standing above him. The deep rhythmic humming became louder and louder, and he could barely concentrate with the ringing in his head. Suddenly, Dusa Vibraji Ja, the chant ended in a shockwave that ripped everyone standing off their feet. Dusa Yugras Ti, another song echoed across the battlefield. There was pulling at his soul. A voice beckoning to come along. It was just a silent whisper to the champion, and he easily resisted the calling from the other side. He looked up to see what was happening. He was almost able to move, but he sank down in horror. The chains that connected him with his followers disintegrated. One by one, but in a big silent wave, like falling dominoes, they ceased to exist, and their souls rushed at the dark figure towering above him. The man suddenly pulled out the long blade at his waist and wordlessly dismembered the champion of Zarkan. The champion, who had been almost able to move, helplessly flopped on the ground. Seth crouched down to him. "How does it feel?" he asked. "How is it to watch everything fall apart? You are the guy from Delta, right? What are you doing here?" "Oh, you know. Got abducted, leveled up, am on my way back home. Found a guy jerking off to my girlfriend while his army is trying to kill her. The usual." Seth answered sarcastically. "But don't get me wrong. This would have happened anyway, only a little nicer." Seth made small talk as he watched the number in his soul space rise. Several hundred small and medium-sized souls came in. "I guess once I kill you, the anchor point, all Zarkists on Earth will be gone, right?" He wanted to make it slow, but the thought of Mina fighting made it somewhat urgent. He trusted in Mina and the equipment he gave her, but he was rather safe than sorry. Seth tried to harvest his soul, but divine chains firmly stopped the power of his skill. Even if he was to burn the body to ashes, he would be unable to harvest the soul. He shrugged and pulled out a soul-piercer dagger from his inventory. If he could not harvest it, he would destroy it. He could see the tears and panic in the man's eyes. Was this really a champion of a god? Just when the blacksmith wanted to thrust the dagger into his chest, he heard a thunderous voice. The clouds in the sky opened and a bright light shone down. "Don't you dare to take his life!" A tremendous pressure descended onto Seth, and he could barely move. Confidence returned to the champion's eyes. This was the voice of his god. He would not forsake him. "And why shouldn't I? Did you not do enough? You took revenge, you have the souls. Spare his life. It's unreasonable for champions to kill each other this early in the game." "The game? You take this as a game? You are telling me I should let this thing go and risk it takes revenge because of your game?" "Yes." "Ha. Fine. I will not kill him." Seth barked with bared teeth. The champion of Zarkan chuckled on the ground, as his limbs grew back on. It seemed to think that it had won. Seth did not stop just because the god told him to. He had a premonition and a better idea. "I can't kill him? Fine, I will do worse." With a magnanimous smile, he turned to the man on the ground and spoke in a disgustingly sweet voice. "Don't think this is over. I have a condition for keeping you alive like tentacles of shadows and darkness." These words crept into the champion's ears. The laughter stopped. "What do you want? It's simple. You have to equip this necklace. Nothing more. The words were sweet like honey, but they invoked pictures of decaying bodies and their sickeningly sweet smell of rotting meat in the man's mind. There was more to it, but what harm was there in wearing a piece of jewelry? He was a champion blessed by a god. Fine. Seth handed him the whimsical curse with a demonic smile. What is this? What is going on? No. The moment the other put on the cursed necklace, it sank into his skin and became a tattoo, and at the same moment, it started to wildly suck away his life force. What is this? What have you done to me? How can I take it off? You can't, that's the fun part. It was just how Seth anticipated. Within minutes the champion started to visibly age. So what if this had divine regeneration powers and an immortal soul? As the necklace kept on sucking away life force, its power kept on strengthening. And soon it overpowered the champion's blessing. The necklace simply kept draining him and strengthening itself. There was no intervention from Zarkan this time, and Seth watched the god's chosen struggle for 10 minutes. He took even less time than Dave to fall apart to ashes. To Seth's surprise, the necklace was not in the dust and the champion had not died. Above the ashes floated a soul. A living soul with the imprint of the whimsical curse on it. Well, this time you made something interesting. The pocket lich stated, intrigued. Chapter 352. Smoke signals. What do you mean? Well, technically you turned this guy into a crippled phylactery. From what could be observed, followers of Zarkan were equivalent to a living lich. Their soul was bound to the mortal realm, through the binding of the god, similar to how a lich would attach their souls to a phylactery. This made the physical body unable to die. Even if destroyed, it would simply regenerate. To kill them, one needed to either cut the chains that bound the soul, or destroy the soul. Both were equivalent to destroying a lich's phylactery. As the anchor on this plane, there was no chain to cut. The champion simply possessed an immortal soul by the virtue of his class and blessing. Now, this anchor was crippled because of the whimsical cure. It could not regenerate the body as fast as the item sucked away the life force. The phylactery was intact, the soul was alive but completely unable to act. Is it dangerous? Seth asked carefully. He had no experience with disembodied living souls. Could the champion still use skills? The only time he touched a living soul was when he attached the hands to Evie's soul. Don't worry, it's safe. Currently, this soul does not even have an ego. Wait, what? How is that a thing? It is more complicated, but you have to be either alive or dead to display ego. And the latter needs special circumstances to even happen, like your skill, a ritual, or a terribly strong will. Right now, he is neither. He is like a sent letter that is stuck in delivery. Neither the body nor the soul can harbor the ego while the body constantly tries to regenerate. So, right now this soul is just a ball of energy that can't defend itself. Seth mentioned with a big smile. Soul of Weevil trailer, big, alive. It was not labeled a crafting material, but that did not mean Seth was unable to work with it. He had once done it with Evie's soul, so he was theoretically able to use living souls. It was just that he could not create an item with it. When he made the immortal witch hands, they did not count as an item that gave him skill proficiency. Now, this fact was up for debate. With his new class, he might very well be able to play around with this new thing. There was only one drawback: he could not put living things into the inventory space. Seth was forced to put the soul in a small pouch he tied to his belt. Having finished this business, he turned around and his gaze wandered over the demolished army. Belatedly he realized that he had no idea what effect his deeds would have had on the actual battle. In a hurry, he sprinted back in the direction of the caravan. He needed Puffles if he wanted to scout the area for a large battle. Since he had no need to hide on the way back, he did not mind small trees and shrubbery in his way. Wearing the helm of Hades, he was an invisible freight train that simply ran in a straight line, flattening anything in his path. It was relatively easy since his armor reflected 50% of any impact back at the attacker, in this case, the greenery. Running in a straight line, it only took him 15 minutes to return to his allies. He only gave a short summary of what happened and left dealing with the aftermath to others. They would only need to follow the almost straight path Seth had cut into the vegetation on his way back. He got on Puffles and the two swung into the dark night sky to search for a place of battle. The only lead Seth had was the small lake where the ladies had taken a bath. If he found it, he was sure that he would be able to find Mina and the others. Unfortunately, this region was riddled with smaller and bigger lakes and ponds. He had confidently chosen this direction because of the numerous bodies of water, but there were more than he bargained for. When Puffle's flight time was over, they returned to the ground and Seth got a closer look. These were not natural lakes and ponds. Seth realized they were a leftover of an old city that had once stood here. One that had been abandoned long before the time of the districts. He only vaguely remembered something like this from history class. All the holes that were now filled with water were once surface mines or collapsed shafts. Maybe it was worth taking his time and looking around here at a later point? After all, he had advanced mining skills and ore detection. But first, he had to find the others. He was sure they had come as a rescue party. Somewhere Yul Katzfer and other forces were fighting for their sake. He had kept going west and south from where the caravan was but found no sign of a battle or even travel. Were they in the north or further west? Seth had not kept track of how long he had searched until he finally decided to return for now. The blacksmith belatedly remembered that nobody among the caravan was able to kill Zarkists. He had forgotten in his hurry. What would happen if they encountered a mutated beast that managed to escape? The only reason he was still calm was the number of chains attached to the soul in his pouch. If there had been any new Zarkists, there would have been additional connections, right? In the distance, he saw a thick column of black smoke rising into the sky. This had to be the caravan doing their work. The place matched the main camp of Zarkan he had destroyed. He decided to return there and search in a spiral from the camp as a center. However, he was worried that he was already too late to help at this point. Seth fed Puffles his last potions and some of the liquor he had bought from Corvo to regenerate his mana to get back in the air as soon as possible. Flying in a straight line, they quickly arrived at the field of burning corpse piles. Seth did not know whether to laugh or cry at the sight. At the edge of the forest, he saw Yul Katzfer and a bunch of other people together with a group of chimeras. The problem was that everyone had drawn their weapons and were locked in a standoff with Marcel and Duhu standing between them, wildly gesticulating. Despite there seemingly being a problem, he was happy to see them unscathed. Happy enough to play them a small prank. It had been ages since the others had seen Puffles. They would totally pee their pants when they saw the new and majestic Puffles 3.0 gliding through the skies. Let's give them a good scare, Puff. Seth whispered. The great me won't take part in childish pranks just like that. How about more ice cream? Puffles, the great is incorrupti. I promised you as much as you want as an apology for Mina eating yours. I double that and add some more of the liquor on top. Fine. What? Fine, we do it. So much for Puffles, the incorruptible. Al teased. Humph. I am getting ice cream and booze. What do you get? The Lich did not answer and stayed silent. But it was not a friendly silence. In the meantime, they flew high in the sky so those on the ground could not detect them. Once they were above the arguing people on the ground, the nightmare caterpillar went into a steep dive, like a free-fall roller coaster. Chapter 353. Know your place. Where are you, Hades? This has your handwriting all over it. I want an explanation, a voice hollered, and a huge, stocky figure crashed into the cinema dimension. Where is he, that Basta? The newcomer fell silent when his gaze fell on the room full of deities. He was a huge burly man covered in wild unkempt hair. His bulging muscle did not really fit his bulging belly and made the tall figure look stocky overall. Zarkan. I understand that you are indignant because a mortal tricked you, but, what made you think you can just barge in here without an invitation? Do you think you are imposing? I am not afraid of you. That guy was your champion or something, right? I will. You. Will. What? Hades had risen from his seat. The god of the underworld was often described as lean or even haggard, but this was a misconception. He was just very tall and not overly wide, which gave the impression of gauntness. Standing upright, he was a head taller than even the mountain of a god, Zarkan. Hades was not overly burly or bulging. Instead, the slit in his robe showed tight, compact muscles like steel. Looking down at Zarkan, Hades wondered. Although he was not as frivolous as his brothers and kept flaunting his powers, was this enough for people to take him for a paper tiger? The attention of the audience was redirected to the conflict between the gods. Zarkan was really an idiot and the people present anticipated in excitement what was about to happen. Hades was a very serious god. When he rose from his throne, things were about to go down. There was a reason he was in charge of such a dangerous place like the underworld. When it came to the kin of Olympus, he was the reliable older brother. Even though they were not the target, all of them could feel Hades' pressure rise. For Zarkan it looked and felt like Hades, who was already taller than him, was growing. He felt like an ant facing an elephant, and he felt a pressure as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Know your place. Get out. Now a voice like the deep darkness in a primordial cave commanded the upstart god. Why yes. Zarkan was gone quicker than he entered. The audience was a little disappointed, but it couldn't be helped. How could a young god like that compete with an old coot like Hades? When Hades turned around, after Zarkan left, he could not hide a smile when he saw an empty seat. That guy would not get far. They heard steps in the darkness. You have a new friend. Oh yeah, Seth? Ask him about the guy that destroyed his champion. With that, the system god left. They suddenly heard a loud whoosh as something dove down from the sky. Before anyone could react, they were enveloped in a bloom of bright, pale fire. But it was not hot, it only felt like a warm summer breeze. It's the caravan leader. Seth. What is the caravan leader doing? Seth. Puffles flew a lap of honor so every one of the newcomers could venerate his magnificent figure before he landed between the two groups. The people hurriedly scattered to make pace for the giant insect landing. Seth and don't tell me. Is that Puffles? Finn exclaimed euphorically. The one and only. The Eye Visor answered with a glint of his golden head like a wink. When had this guy learned to act cool? The moment he got off the giant centipede, a figure charged at him from the shadows and clung to him. I was so worried, the woman with cat ears blamed him with tears in her eyes. Instead of giving an answer, he simply hugged tightly and enjoyed the moment. Finn could not save you, again, the fairy cried. She sat atop his head, bawling. Though Seth was unsure whether she cried for the same reasons Mina did. After a moment, Mike and the rest of Yule Cat's Fur also stepped up to greet him. While they were having a reunion, the two confronting parties looked at them clueless about what to do. The only one looking rather glad was Marcel, as it seemed like the sudden entrance of the Tower Master of Minas Mar had disarmed the situation for now. Seth, an unexpected figure, stepped forward. It was Mark Baker, who had recognized the man who had once sold him the auction interface. After the incident with the Weasel people, he had never heard of Seth again. He had never expected him to be here. What is he doing here? Seth said, surprised. He hesitated for a moment because he had forgotten Baker's name. This man is the representative of Y City in this joint rescue operation. Lena finally stepped forward. Is it true that you are the leader of this group? She looked warily at the giant Eye Visor, who was posing in the back to flaunt his glory in front of the people he knew and garner respect from the people who didn't. The princess was not the only one looking warily at Puffles. Well, I guess I am. But I will gladly hand all the responsibility for these people over to you. Although he would have liked to take his time to catch up with his friends, the official people wanted him to give an official statement. Which simply meant that all the important figures sat down for a few hours and exchanged stories of what happened and who was responsible for what. It was somewhat important since there were roughly 300 refugees left that needed to be appropriately treated and managed. 1/3 were freed slaves, another third were chimeras, and the rest were what was left of the adventurers. As the blacksmith reiterated what happened, the princess showed some reaction when Seth spoke of the darkness but did not question it any further. Finally, Seth proudly claimed that they had lost almost nobody from Delta. The decline in numbers of people from Delta was mostly people teleporting back home with home call. Other people from Delta, even simple civilians, had grown on this journey. They were now strong enough to at least protect their own lives. These individuals are not Zarkanic mutations, but super soldiers surgically created by the theocracy? Something like that is possible. Mark asked, baffled. This statement was the basis of their earlier misunderstanding. The advance guard of the rescue forces had mistaken the chimeras working on burning the humanoid corpses for another abomination and had attacked them. Both sides had fought before Marcel and other adventurers from Delta could finally stop the fights. Fortunately, there were no losses. Only injured people, and most of them among the advance party. The blacksmith successfully managed to shed all further responsibilities for people other than his fosterlings. He felt tired when was finally able to leave the tent acting as command central. Such talks were more tiring than sewing a whole armor set by hand. Hurriedly he scampered to the campsite of his friends. Around the big campfire, he found Linry excitedly describing his activities in the stronghold while everyone else listened eagerly. Even Dohu, the big tiger man, was listening attentively. He silently sat down beside Mina. Before he could scooch close, She had already closed the gap and leaned against him. They needed no words to understand each other at this moment. The bard has arrived. Shouldn't the hero tell his story? Or sing his own praises? Lixus teased. It's not cool if I brag about my deeds. It's a lot better to listen to someone else praise me, he answered smugly. The group laughed a little and Linry continued to narrate. As the story continued, more and more people joined to listen. Wait! Seth turned people into demons. Mark Baker exclaimed. No, I didn't, I just opened the door for someone that could. It was Seth who burned the evil forest. Pip asked a little later. Seth was a little embarrassed when he admitted that it was him. He knew that she and her friends had some trouble running from the fire. It was a good thing that it was not too much of a problem and none of the group held a grudge. When it came to what happened in the swamp, Seth had to give a summary of what he did there, but he did not go into detail. You forged an archangel. Lena screamed when Linry described what happened on the plains. Ah, yeah. He had followed an impulse back then and when he noticed that he could succeed, there was no stopping him. The problem was that he was unsure what to do with these items. They were filled with the divine power of a god foreign to the system, as such they could not be appraised. The blacksmith had no idea what exactly these items could do without testing them. Can I see one of those weapons? She asked in a shaky voice. Even if they were weapons outside of the system, something forged from the materials of a divine being was extremely rare. Just like items from materials of a true dragon. Something like that had the chance to be a national treasure just by the virtue of its materials. Chapter 354. Catching up. Seth himself was unsure about using these weapons. They seemed lifeless but holding them gave him a disconcerting feeling. Add to that he could not appraise them, and it made them technically unusable. He didn't want to expose anyone close to him to potential dangers. Seeing how eager the princess was to take a look, Seth did not feel apprehensive in giving her a chance. Maybe she had a way to find the effects. Sure. Here, he said and handed Lena the sword made from the angel's arm. The princess was surprised at how easily he lent it to her but was quickly distracted by the item itself. Unlike a normal weapon, the sword was forged from one continuous piece of metal, the angel's arm. The long broad blade made from the arm still looked rather normal, although big. The macabre part was the handle, forged from the creature's hand. The crooked crossguard could still be identified as a thumb and pinky while the handle itself were middle, ring and pointer finger twisted like a rope. At the pommel, the nails of these three fingers held a peculiar bead. What is this pommel? I have never seen such a material. Lena mumbled. Everyone else also looked over her shoulders to get a look at the item. It was the first time he had taken them out after making them and even though back then many had watched him forge, few had gotten a good look at what he had actually done. Oh, that? It's one of the eyes. Seth commented matter-of-factly. The eyes of the angels had been purple marbles made of an unknown metal. In that situation, they seemed quite fitting for the pommel of the sword and the tip of the staff. Shocked, the princess pulled her hand away from the pommel she had just been fondling. I can't appraise it either. Would you mind if I took this to the Empire and had our royal appraiser take a look at the item? She asked carefully. Although she really had no bad intentions, if the other party did not trust her, they might think she was not going to return it. Lena was unsure what Seth thought about her. Go ahead, Seth said without a care. Her worries were unfounded. The blacksmith was not attached to these weapons. Testing them himself or giving them to others for use was out of the question. If the Empire kept it, he just lost something he did not care too much about. If the Empire succeeded and she gave the item back, then Seth had a safe way to test their effects. From his perspective, he really had nothing to lose and all to gain. Thankful, the princess put the sword into her own inventory. The day grew long and the night dark when their merry get-together finally dispersed and Seth was alone with his people. A soundproof barrier was erected, and they could finally talk about business. They reported about the actions of Minas Mar and the resulting growth. Seth listened approvingly as they described Monique's moves as the temporary tower master. He was really glad that they had managed not to burn everything down the moment he was gone. In his mind he praised himself. This was the advantage to build an organization by delegating others. Even if he was not there, everyone was able to do their job. When they finally got tired from talking, they decided to split and get some good sleep. It had been a long day for everyone. Just when they were about to stand up, a sad voice could be heard. Mom! What about me? I also wanted roasted meat. The Imuji was really sad at this moment. Mom had reunited with his very important friends, and it was understood that it could not just come out in front of all the people there. That was why it waited. When the strangers were gone, and they talked more privately, it thought that its moment came. It listened and waited. They merrily talked about what happened and ate roasted meat. It looked so delicious. But it held back and waited for its cue. But it never came. They just ate all the meat without it. They talked and laughed without it. When they were about to leave, it could no longer hold back. Why am I being excluded? It cried out. Who's that? Finn asked curiously. Seth had left out everything about the Imuji when he talked about the swamp adventure. He wanted to come back to it later, but he somehow forgot. I'm sorry. He had no excuse and summoned the chubby snakelet. Its big round eyes glittered with held back tears. This is... I didn't come up with a good name yet. It's an Imuji I adopted in the swamp. Everyone knew what an Imuji was, but only Finn's eyes glittered. She immediately stuck to the little pseudo-dragon and hugged it. Well, she technically laid on its head. The Imuji did not resist and calmed at the sudden sign of affection. Ah, it's so cute. Hello, little one. Finn is Finn. Call me Finn, she said energetic. The hyperactive fairy was at it again. Similar scenes had played when she met Pip and her friends. The fairy brute had a surprisingly soft side for children and hatchlings. It was just that she could never live it out with Puffles. The Ivisor was just too high and mighty to accept being treated like a child. The Imuji and the children on the other hand starved for a loving person to coddle them, and Finn was willing to cuddle and indulge them all day long. Seth was glad it played out like this. Mostly because he was able to silently sneak away from the campfire, Mina in tow. They had business to take care of. Important business that had waited much too long. While the couple was gone doing couple business, the rest of the party was left to babysit the baby Imuji. Everyone was nice and even roasted some more meat for it, despite their obvious fatigue. Snakelet took a great liking to its mom's family. Its family. Although mom was maybe not the best mom, it decided that the family it had chosen was pretty good. In the morning, Seth and Mina left their tent and it was clear that they had not slept for a single moment. Even the rest of the party, that had spent a long while babysitting the Imuji, had gotten a few hours of sleep. Unfortunately, they could not stay in the tent all day, either. They had business to attend to. After giving their report yesterday, the leadership would decide on further actions to be taken. Mina was part of Lena's guard and Seth could not escape being involved in the matter. He really tried. Forced by the circumstances, they washed up and got dressed in the morning. Mina and the others had to join the princess. Seth on the other hand only had to join the meeting later when he was called. The blacksmith found the Imuji, Finn, Pip, and the other children all huddled together leaning against Puffles. Seth could only imagine what kind of bonding they had gone through for this scene to happen. Seeing them sleep like this, he decided not to wake them up and left to get something to eat from the field kitchen. Here he found rows and rows of benches where people sat with their breakfast. He worried about Mina and the others. Had they gotten something to eat before going to their job? Wait! Wasn't Finn also part of guard duty? Why was she sleeping soundly with the bunch of children? Seth. Duh waved at him. The Tigerman sat together with Azul and surprisingly the mysterious Archer. Good morning. How are you? Good. I have to say, the food of this field kitchen is a lot better than the stuff we had at the caravan. Azul answered happily. It was true that the food at the caravan was not really good. Although they had quite a lot of chefs at the start of their journey, they seldomly had the time to set up something like a mobile kitchen. Half their journey they could not even use fire. This meant, in her case, this was the first average food of her life. She was correspondingly euphoric. Haha, really? Then I will have to get some myself. Seth answered amused at the Chimera's joy and went to get a plate of his own. When Seth came back a few minutes later, his friends were baffled. He had somehow managed to obtain several servings and balanced them all on a single tray. Incredulous they watched Seth eat more than even the big Tigerman could stomach. You were right, it's definitely better than the stuff we cooked on the journey. Oh damn, I'm late. Let's talk again later, he said in a hurry. Someone informed him that it was time to join that meeting. Chapter 355. I will excuse myself. Seth entered the big commando central and looked at the menagerie. There were Lena, Mark, and the gloomy general from Arjit Noor who represented the rescue forces. Further, there were also Marcel and the old man from the worker camp present. "Good morning, everyone. How's it going?" he greeted them before sitting down at the table. He winked at Mina and waved at Mike, who was standing behind Lena. Today they wanted to talk about what to do from here on out. After all, everyone had come to save those that were kidnapped by the theocracy of chains. Now, they had found these people and even more. But they also had new information, such as the City of Hope in the middle of nowhere. The princes, the general, and the official from Y City had come together earlier to discuss the stance of the rescue party before talking about it with the representatives of the refugees. Unfortunately, Seth had to take part in this as the representative of the Chimeras. It was the only duty he was unable to shirk. Since Azul, and consequently all the Chimeras left, decided to follow him, they had become his responsibility. "Since we are now all together, I will share what we, the leaders of the combined rescue force, have discussed." The princess spoke up. Their plan was to split off some of their forces to investigate Hope and the plane. This was mostly the interest of Y City and the Empire. They had little information on this part of the continent, as if the prophecies of the system god had deliberately left out some information. This was nothing unusual. After all, how would they struggle, if he gave them a full walkthrough? Even when their god gave them a lot of information, he would never share it all. The rest would travel west, back into the direction of Gamma. At the start of village in Gamma, they were getting ready to ferry the refugees back to Delta anyway. Thanks to the higher levels of magic in the mountain range, the wilderness and mountains between Gamma and Delta were more dangerous than average. The refugees lacked the strength to survive there, which was why strong escorts were a given. At this point, the returning adventurers of Delta, with their strength, would make a good addition to these escorts. Teleportation was out of the question for them, because they would be split because of the randomization for Orihuma. As for the refugees who were not part of the system, they could undergo a baptism and teleport to Delta, or the Empire if they wished to. The same was true for the Chimeras. As a technically intelligent species, they would probably be able to take part in the baptism and teleport to Delta. These were the plans they had come up with in the morning. "Seth, we hoped you could." The mentioned blacksmith lifted his hand to stop her in the middle of her sentence. "I will have to interrupt you here. Before you rely on me for any sort of mission, I have to inform you that I will be leaving soon." "What?" everyone present called out or mumbled. Mina and Mike only had wry smiles. "Evening the other day." "Oh, yeah, before I forget it. Evie asked us to hand this to you. She said Al would know what it is. And she hoped you would forgive her for taking some of the materials." Mike said when the evening calmed down a little. The beastman brought out a plate made of arcane gold inscribed with all kinds of mystic formations and wards. "HOH? This little girl really improved quickly. What is it?" "It's our ticket home. The core for a spatial beacon. That is, if I understood the intentions of that girl correctly." "A spatial beacon? That means some," exclaimed surprised. "Yeah. As long as we set up the corresponding formation and power it, we can create a signal for Minasmar to pick us up. If Evie picks up the signal, she can open a spatial tunnel for us, to travel back to Minasmarch." Is that really possible?" Lixis asked, baffled. She was not the only one overwhelmed. "Of course, it's possible, theoretically. It is a little less stable than having a fully functional teleportation formation to connect to, like the one in Delta, but that can be made up with enough energy. It's no different from teleporting within the initial range of the tower itself." Silence reigned for a moment. Everyone had their own thoughts when they heard that they could return this quickly. Or in the case of Linry, Whedon, and Pip's group, hearing that safety was so close. The latter were obviously happy. Yulcat's fur on the other hand was a little conflicted, as they felt responsible for the protection of the princess. On the other hand, they had only come for Seth and had not promised anything. "So, what do we need to make this happen?" Seth finally decided for everyone. Well, it was no question, to begin with. "Present. Yes, the members of Minasmar will build the spatial beacon and return to Delta," he stated. Lena looked at him in disbelief. Then back and forth between Mina and Mike behind her and Seth. Were they serious? But what about Finn? Wouldn't she be stuck with all these sweaty men and not even have this harbor of cuteness to rely on? "I'm sorry. We decided yesterday." Mina apologized to the princess with a wry smile. "Why you can't? You should help us bring these people back home safely," she said in a panic. "I have a promise to keep and I won't risk it." I did more than enough by bringing these people up to this point. It is your duty to bring them home safely, not mine. If Seth had to be brutally honest, he had only stayed because of the few people he was unable to take back with him through home call. He had promised Linri to bring her to Delta. Whedon, Evan, Azul, Pip, and her friends would have also been stuck here. Deep down, he just did not want to take the responsibility for more than he could chew. Still, he had stepped up to help multiple times, nobody could blame him for taking his people and going home, now that he had the opportunity. The princess quickly realized that there was no point in arguing. She would have to let go of Finnmark, and the general had not voiced any opposition but stayed silent. At least, let the chimeras stay with us. Mark suddenly asked. We could really use their firepower on the way back. The Dark Elven general nodded at that in agreement. Their journey from Gamma up to here was not without dangers. And now they had over 100 non-combatants to protect while they split off part of their fighting force to investigate Hope. The powerful chimeras would be a great assurance. I will have to speak with them if they are willing. Seth gave a non-committing answer. He was not even sure whether they could teleport all chimeras if they wanted to. According to the Lich's assessment, there was a limit. Even if they found a good place to set it up, each person to travel through it would deteriorate the formation. Otherwise, he would have already offered to teleport the refugees, too. However, there were many things that could go wrong with Evie's makeshift beacon. Not to mention the instability and energy consumption of such a portal. It was questionable whether they had more than one try. Still, whether he could take them, or whether they were willing to stay, there was another important question. You know, they are technically members of Mina's March. I am sure I could persuade them, but that's not free. After all, they risk their lives by staying here. Don't you think you should offer them some benefits to ease their decision? Seth opened up the negotiations. The rest of the meeting was rather awkward after Seth dropped the bombshell and haggled them out of some money and promises. They had to decide on someone else who had to lead the people to Hope and somehow work around the fact that the chimeras might be gone before they even started their journey back. It did not end with any satisfying decisions but rather fizzled out, and everyone was happy to get a break afterward. Chapter 356. More than just a way home. After the meeting was finally over and their intentions were conveyed, the members and future members of Mina's Mar got ready to return to Delta. Although the princess had asked whether they could take the refugees, Seth had denied it. On one hand, were the technical difficulties. On the other hand, he simply did not like them enough to let them visit their secret base for even just a moment. He had spoken with the chimeras about staying with the caravan and they accepted when Seth told them about the benefits. They could gain a guaranteed citizenship in Delta and the Empire would fork out a fitting pay for the chimeras and Mina's March. Okay, to set up the beacon formation you have to. Unsuccessfully, the great sorceress tried to explain the intricate details of a spatial formation to Seth and the others. In the end, she could only sigh. Just summon me. I will do it. There is something I have to give you anyway. Seth was apprehensive for just a moment, but once the beacon was set, they would be able to return home anyway. He should be able to give up this trump card for now. So he summoned Alzalsar, the almost legendary sorceress, for the first time in weeks. Her tall voluptuous figure with curves in all the right places had not changed one bit from his memories. It was the first time for some of them to see her, and even Duha, who had completely different beauty standards, could only stare slack-jawed. Poor Evan's brain almost melted as he was torn between ogling her revealing outfit and showing decency by looking away. His hand also made a weird dance between covering his eyes and pulling away. Finally, I have returned, she stated and stretched relaxed, letting out some ambiguous moans. How long will you need to set up the formation? Seth swallowed and asked. She scoffed and looked at him like a predator. Oh no, he had fallen for her ruse. He had summoned the greatest danger himself. Before he could react, he was caught by the gruff and couldn't escape. Mina, help me. Oh ho. Don't worry, I did not forget about your little girlfriend. She will join us. What? Mina cried out in a panic, but before the drama could unfold, she was caught too and the three had vanished into Seth's tent. Shortly after, a barrier materialized that stopped any interference. She was surprisingly gentle with the couple, leaving both of them behind only exhausted. You better get to work once you return. With that, she dematerialized. Before she vanished, she left 2 tomes in the tent. These are the manuals and blueprints you need to create the spatial beacon in my vessel. That's right. She had not taken them out of an inventory or written them down. The sorceress had used the enchanter's skill to create things like the enchantment scrolls blacksmiths could use to learn enchantments. This was simply the Grand Master level of this skill. In one go, she had compiled all enchantments and instructions needed to build something into a tome that could be immediately learned by reading it. With this, Seth would have no trouble creating her vessel or building the spatial beacon. And if anything was not clear, she was still there after all. It just saved her a lot of time explaining complicated stuff to the numbskull that was Seth. Said Blacksmith had barely enough power to lift his arm and put the tomes in his inventory. He could only read them later. First, he needed to catch up on some sleep. Mina and Seth were not seen again until the morning of the next day. When he woke up, he felt a lot better. It was not just the direly needed sleep, but also the realization that this odyssey was over. With the still sleeping Mina in his arms, he brought out the manual for the spatial beacon. The moment he opened the tome, page by page, the knowledge was projected in his mind. It felt similar to using a skill scroll as the foreign knowledge was crammed into his brain. Ooh! He moaned when it was finally over. He felt like a massive headache was coming over him, after this kind of procedure. Seth decided that it was better to ask someone to appraise the tome for Al's vessel before he used it. It felt like these items should have an intelligence requirement and he had barely fulfilled those for the spatial beacon. "Are you okay?" Mina mumbled as she hugged him tightly. As an answer he just hugged her back. What was a little headache? He now knew how to get back home. All he needed to do was lay out the formation that would stabilize the spatial travel, insert the core sent by Evie and give it a strong power source for the signal. And he already knew exactly what to use for that power source. The soul of Zarkan's champion. Of course, he could have used a different soul for this, but Seth had a hunch that he did not want to keep this soul. As tempting as making something with a living soul was, he had that weird premonition that he should not keep it. He had learned to listen to his intuition. He had enough items and skills that gave it credibility. After washing up and getting dressed he went to the field kitchen to get something to eat for Mina and himself. It was early noon, so he came just in time to get what was left of breakfast and some of the stuff for lunch. Mina and Seth happily shared a brunch before he called his people together to inform them about their next steps. "Puffles, we have to leave and look for a place to set up the formation." "You just woke up and already want to leave?" Puffles asked lazily. Seth remembered the landscape he had scouted on the search for the Allied forces had a lot of blank cliffs and places that looked like quarries. It was a great place to look for a flat surface and carve a magic circle into. Although he had thought it could be interesting to look around that area, at this point it seemed too much of a hassle to travel that far. He didn't really want to return there right now, but he still mentioned this possibility to the others. "Why would you make the formation so far away? Just stay close, okay?" Mina saw right through him. "Traveling this far in such a small group might be dangerous for our weaker members," Doha mentioned, gesturing at the group of children around Pip. Mina gave him a personal excuse not to go and Doha a logical one. Gladly he took this chance to let go of the thought of that area. Was there treasure lurking in those remnants? Maybe. But did he need more treasure? He just wanted to get home. "All right, we will just scout the area close by to find a suitable place for the formation," he exclaimed happily. "Maybe I could ask the trees." Judging by the geology of the area, the mountains in the vicinity should have some places fit for the purpose. "You should look further north from here," Whedon suddenly mentioned. "How do you know that?" Pip asked interestedly. She had wanted to ask the nature for a good place, but before she could finish, Whedon had already spoken up. "I may not be a mason, but I am still a dwarf. My ancestors would be ashamed if I could not do some simple geology," Whedon answered proudly. The small mountain range they were currently in continued and grew taller further north. If Seth remembered correctly, these were a branch of the mountain range that separated the southern districts from Omega in the north. "All right then, north it is. Finn wants to come along." "Mountains are dangerous." Finn suddenly shouted and took her traditional seat on Seth's head. For a moment he thought about declining her. He was able to become invisible if there was any real danger in Puffles. Seth was unsure if there was something that could pose a real danger to the Eye-Visor. On the other hand, Finn was small and fast. "And I almost forgot," Seth suddenly exclaimed, surprising the others. Then Seth started pulling out chests and boxes from his inventory. Over their chaotic reunion, the blacksmith had not gotten the chance to upgrade his followers, yet. As Finn had reminded him, she was the first to receive a small jewelry chest, which to her was the size of a big treasure trove. Inside she found the tiny pair of greaves, pseudo-gauntlets, a necklace, 2 bangles, and a soul piercer the size of a toothpick. Her eyes sparkled as everything was made to fit her size and could be further adjusted with tiny leather straps. She was brimming with a thirst for battle after Seth finished. The fairy brute hugged his cheek so tightly that it felt like he got a bruise from it. Maybe this was the wrong move, Seth thought as he watched the fairy enthusiastically punching the air. Just how much more terrifying would she become, when demonic frost moths spawned with her every strike? Next was Mike, who stopped listening to him the moment he had given out the new sword. Flaming fury immediately piqued his interest, and his obsession grew when Seth explained the blessing of violence. I guess you are okay with only the sword? Maybe I should give the rest to someone else. For a moment he thought of simply keeping the rest of his equipment. This sword lunatic was probably unable to appreciate his hard work. When Mike heard his word, he looked up in shock and immediately started wagging his tail. No. No. I'm sorry. Please, Great Master Smith, bestow upon me your grace. This filthy worm did not mean to disrespect, he fell to his knees and begged but couldn't keep a straight face himself. Seth also couldn't help but laugh. Fine, fine. Stop the act, you sword loon. Just listen to me when I explain. With that, Seth continued to hand out everyone's new equipment, even Mike got the rest of his. Lixis got her new staff, the Ring of the Ice Witch, an earring similar to his, made from volcanic glass for fire and earth affinity. Seth didn't have any specialized materials at the time, so he focused on Bulko's needs when he made his equipment. He got a full epic leather armor that primarily increased his status resistances and mana pool. Additionally, he got a mace that also acted as a scepter for casting spells. So, it was more like a scepter for hitting people? Bulko was the last one, and with that Yulecat's fur had gotten a full upgrade to epic and above equipment. Now that Finn was a whole lot more dangerous than before, he felt they were ready to set off. Chapter 357 Northern Mountains. Seth, with Finn on his head, sat on Puffles, who started running off into the distance. The Ivisor stayed on the ground to save mana since they were unsure whether they would have to fight or not. They were traveling in silence for roughly an hour, which gave Seth time to once more go over the knowledge he had gained. Consciously remembering this knowledge was different than just having it shoved in his brain the first time. This time he really understood the theories and steps one by one and could also make associations and connections with his own experience and knowledge. It gave him a few ideas about how he could improve the rings of Minas Mar, for example. It was also a foundation he could use to further his knowledge in this area. Only now did he really realize how much of a gift this manual was. And this was just the simple beacon. Just what would the manual for Alzalsar's vessel hold in store for him? You should really learn it as soon as possible. The Lich spoke up. Sometimes there were really long breaks between her doing something or speaking up. Seth started suspecting that her talking to him like this took a harder toll on her than she was willing to admit. Isn't there a restriction to use those things? The space beacon already gave me a headache, he spoke in his mind. TCH, as expected of a numbskull like you. What's your current intelligence? Arim, 100 without items and 330 with items. Your items are really broken. Anyways, the minimum requirement for my vessel is 300 intelligence. You may get a mean headache, but that's all. Fine, I will learn it when we return to the camp, he gave in. Seth, did you miss Finn at all? The little brute on his head suddenly spoke up after a while. Of course, I missed Finn. Finn also missed Seth. Finn misses the time when it was just the three of us. Oh, have you included the Great Me? Yes, Puffles is included. It's not like we were separated, Finn. But you are always working on something, and if you aren't working you are with Mina. Don't you like Finn anymore? Finn hoped to save you this time, but, even if you are in trouble, Finn can't come in time to shine. The fairy kept rambling while drawing circles on his head. I'm sorry, Finn. Maybe I was a little too caught up in the work. Let's play more games together in the future. Or maybe you can come and accompany me in the workshop. Really? Yeah. You mean it? Sure, why are you doubting me? Yay. Having emotionally extorted a promise from Seth, the fairy became much happier on their journey. In the meantime, Seth had kept an eye on his map, but there was no suitable terrain yet. Just small valleys and mountains. Only once they entered the actual mountain range, did they come across a suitable terrain. It was an almost even plateau. Seth wanted to carve the formation into a rock surface because this would help stabilize the overall function. Puffles flew up and landed on the wide surface and Seth dismounted to check the place. This seems okay. I will start sketching it, you guys should scout the area for danger, he said and brought out the chalk. Puffles and Finn left while Seth started drawing complicated lines and geometrical patterns. He was half done when he heard steps behind him. "HOH, this seems quite intricate. What are you doing here?" Seth turned around and found a man looking like a magician. His robes looked quite magical and expensive, but they were dirty and ripped. "I'm setting up a space beacon to return home. How about you? It seems like you had better days." Seth did not stop sketching and answered freely. "Wow! You already have that kind of technology in this world," the old man asked innocently. "First one is free. Anything more has to be paid." Seth answered with a smirk. He could audibly hear the other swallow in surprise before he coughed. "Please excuse my intrusiveness. No harm done. Don't worry about it." An awkward silence followed that was soon broken by Puffles swooping down on the plateau. The visitor stepped back in shock but did not run away. "Bad news. Some people are fighting a rock giant a few valleys away. Obviously, I could take it on, but there is no need for unnecessary fights, right? We should leave before we are implicated. That rock giant is really massive." Finn could barely see its head. "It's tall as a mountain," Finn described, wildly gesticulating with her tiny hands. Seth glanced at the bedraggled wizard who awkwardly looked into the distance. "So, tell me, are you hunting the rock giant, or did you accidentally provoke it?" What? I have no idea what you are talking about. Rock giant? What is that? Never heard of it. You know, if you are honest with me, I might help you, Seth said with an alluring voice. There was no way he would help them just like that. The scale-tipping information why he thought of helping these people was the rock giant itself. Of course, he didn't want to find a new place for the formation, too. Said rock giant had just stepped into the range of his automapping and to Seth's surprise, it was a walking ore deposit. One quite different from the ones he had seen before. This one was golden as if to indicate how special it was. How could he simply walk away from this? Especially if there was another party that could carry the losses and could be squeezed for profits. Now he just needed to make this old coot talk. If they came to hunt it, they might have prepared a way to kill it. This would ease Seth's workload by a lot. If they were just surprised by it, they were practically cannon fodder. "See, can you really help?" the old man asked unsurely. He warily looked at Puffles and Finn. Sure, the eye visor was impressive, but it was tiny compared to the walking mountain. He had planned to recover his mana here and then find a way to get his guard out of that situation. "Sure, I could help, but what is in it for me?" the blacksmith asked as he mounted the giant centipede. The message was clear. He could either leave or go help those people. The wizard only hesitated for a moment before he knelt down. "My name is Zarduz Draglebot, and I am the court wizard of Murtana. We indeed came to this world to hunt this stone giant. Our princess has contracted a terrible disease. To cure it we need the kale yapes, which grows in the brain of some stone giants." The old man immediately spilled their tragic story to garner empathy. "Is that a real thing?" Seth thought in his mind to verify the information with L. I did hear about this material somewhere before. It is actually some kind of stone plant that grows in some earth creatures like a brain tumor. But I have no idea about its medical uses." The Lichdex explained. "So, what went wrong?" Seth asked emotionlessly. He didn't want them to think they could get his help with a sad story. "The beast we finally found using a huge number of resources and trans-dimensional detection magic turned out stronger than expected. It is actually a terrifying field boss. At the final moment it broke away from our array trap and he hesitated. You ran off to recover your mana while your subordinates keep it in check." Seth helped him with his story. "Why yes. Could we lure it back into that array? Will that kill it?" "I don't think that is possible. It is in a berserk state and already knows about. Let that be my worry." "Would that kill it?" "Yes, as long as it steps into the soul dispersion array and stays there for another 10 seconds. Soul dispersion. Yes? It is the only way to kill such a huge beast without risking damaging the kale yapes. Tell me, how does that array work?" Suddenly, Seth's face was directly in front of the kneeling old man's. Shocked, he fell back on his butt. I can't disclose. I will help you and consider this part of the payment. Your subordinates don't have much time, right? And don't forget about your poor princess. Speak. He felt some strings tuck in the back of his mind, but for whatever reason the old man trusted Seth. What could go wrong? It wasn't like the young man asked for the blueprints. No harm would come from that. Zardu spilled the beans. Following this, a plan formed in Seth's mind. Chapter 358. Stone Giant Chrysoprase. Where did the court magician run off to? Do you think he ran and left us behind? A handful of figures were frantically running and jumping across the steep cliffs of a broad valley. They were pursued by a giant mass of emerald-colored stone in a vaguely humanoid shape. Taking turns, they would attack and kite the beast to buy time. These men were warriors around level 70, but they stood no chance in a direct confrontation with the titanic field boss. Currently, the giant was wakened and in a frenzy because of the array trap. Otherwise, they could not have survived this long. Suddenly, a concentrated beam of golden light, shot from a close mountain peak, penetrated the giant's deformed shoulder. The beast's attention fell on the terrifying flying insect that had just lifted off the mountain top. Despite the insect's humongous size, it was like a worm compared to the stone giant. It flew around his head as if to provoke it. The clumsy boulder swiped for it, but it was too swift to be caught. Ding! You have witnessed the might of field boss Stone Giant Chrysoprase. Experience gained. Seth heard the notification as he was mid-fall from Puffle's back. Only from above could he see the true scope of the mighty Chrysoprase. He had jumped off the Ivisor's back to land somewhere between the shoulder and nape of the beast. The blacksmith was wearing the helm of Hades, confident not to be found. This stone giant was a good example that there were huge differences in the strength of field bosses. Seth could go up against something like the pseudo-swamp dragon and maybe even a hanging tree. However, there was no way he would even dare to fight something like Chrysoprase if it was not already severely weakened, and he had a watertight plan. Now, the stone giant was weakened, and Seth had a plan. At first, he thought to lure the beast back into the array formation. That was until he heard that it was a soul dispersion array. After listening to the old wizard's explanation, it became clear what Seth was going to do. The array did not literally dissolve the soul of a being. The purpose was to dissolve the connection between the target's body and soul. This would leave a completely intact, but empty body behind. The problem was that the cost of this array and the needed materials did not justify commercial use. If this was not about the princess of a country, there was no way anybody would use this method to hunt. What this meant was, that Chrysoprase was currently weakened because his soul was almost completely disconnected from his body. This also explained the frenzy, clumsiness, and his humanoid shape almost falling apart. Seth landed on the giant's shoulders with the intention of harvesting its souls. He touched the emerald stone below his feet, but nothing happened. There was no soul he could harvest. You probably have to go deeper. This might just be an armor. Al commented. When he heard this, Seth first imagined the giant wearing an actual stone armor, but when he tried to touch what should be the giant's neck, there was also no soul. Maybe the giant's whole exterior was not its real body? A stone mech, he mumbled at the thought and had an idea. He would have never guessed that he would be able to use these skills in a fight. The blacksmith equipped his pickaxe and started mining into the giant. Like a woodworm, Seth dug his tunnel bit by bit. The stone below was much softer once he broke through half a meter of the green quartz shell. The work became much faster and easier. Periodically he would touch the stone walls to see if he reached the true body. Before Chrysoprase in his frenzy noticed that something was wrong, Seth had already dug his tunnel into the giant's back. All that was visible was a hole, the size of a mosquito bite, compared to the creature's size. There was nothing it could do at this point. On his way down, most of the material was generic rock. Seth couldn't differentiate that. But sometimes he would come with thin veins of ore, like dawn ore and even cernum ore. These mere metals normally not found on Earth. Seth had started digging at the shoulder and aimed roughly towards the giant's chest. The entrance to the it became a small dot of light somewhere above and behind him. The only nuisance during his work was the constant swaying and sudden jerks when his host moved. Still, like a diligent little parasite, Seth kept digging and soon he hit a layer of incredibly hard stone. Even the epic pickaxe had a hard time dealing with this material. It was the more frantic sway and movements that made Seth touch the pieces of dark stone before him. He had reached it. This was the rock giant's true body. No wonder those people had decided to use something like a soul-dispersing array. There was no way for physical or magical damage to easily penetrate such a thick cover of rock and ore. Unfortunately, Seth had taken too long. The connection between Chrysopras's soul and the body was already recovering. Despite that, he didn't lose hope. He had already reached the true body. It couldn't run, all he needed to do is kill it up front and personal. Thus he started backing the pickaxe against the layer of adamantine rock. Soon even this epic pickaxe started dulling with Seth having dug less than half a meter into the tough rock. Sweat was streaming down his body and he sat down. This was going nowhere. He had no idea how the fight outside was going. He could only hope Puffles was holding on. Seth stared at the dark rock that barred his way to the giant's herd and thought about a solution. Could he maybe heat the stone and then rapidly cool it with something like the freezing chain mail? This was the generic solution for such a problem he knew from novels. But would that work in this kind of tunnel? Age didn't want everything to come crashing down on him, then he facepalmed himself at his own stupidity. He had an epiphany about the most simple solution. It had always been there. It was one of his core skills. It was just that he had never used it this way. Soul weapons. The blacksmith could simply forge a pure soul weapon that would ignore the target's defense and directly harm the soul. It was the same principle as the soul dispersion array, just that the soul was directly harmed and not just disconnected. Once he knew what to do, he quickly put it into action. Seth carved out enough space to summon his anvil and started forging one of the big snake souls into a long spear. These soul armaments made from souls looked like the ghost of a weapon. They were translucent with a dim white or bluish glow. Soul Spear. Rare. Soul Damage. 1200. An ethereal weapon created by craftsman Smith. By the nature of the item, it will ignore any defense and deal direct damage to the soul. The description was not much to look at, but it was not supposed to be overly special. Seth did not intend to destroy the giant's soul. He just wanted to weaken it to a state he could harvest it. He stabbed with the spear into the dark stone that blocked his way, and it sank in. It was a weird sensation, completely different from any experience he had before. As if he was pushing the weapon into a giant block of tofu. There was some resistance, but the ghostly weapon just kept sinking into the stone. His actions stayed not without consequences. Much different from the twitches and shakes when he hit the real body with the pickaxe, now everything was rocking and shaking like during an earthquake. Seth had to cling to the spear and recall the anvil in a hurry, so it didn't squash him. Being thrown around made the spear wiggle and deal even more damage to the stone giant's soul. This caused the giant to convulse in pain even more. Once he found his footing again, Seth pulled out the spear in one fluid motion, before stabbing it in again with all his might. He kept doing this and checking the souls over and over. The blacksmith almost felt bad. The giant had not offended him, and he would have preferred to give it a quick end instead of this death by 1,000 cuts. However, there was no going back now. Finally, he did not know how much time had gone by, the soul had taken enough damage for Seth to harvest it. Ding! You have killed stone giant Chrysopras leave 83. Experience earned. Ding! You are now leave 60. Chapter 359. Class Advancement. Ding! The quest next level 7 has been fulfilled. Ding! You have unlocked your primary class advancement. Check your status window for further information. A class advancement? Before he checked his status, he looked at the soul in his hands. The damages were visible as dark spots and streaks across the little glowing ball of light. Harvested Chrysopras soul, big/damaged/degraded, crafting material, rare. Severely damaged soul of a stone giant by the name of Chrysopras. Size and rating have been lowered because of the damage. Seeing the soul like this, Seth found this was a rather suboptimal harvest. He could only sigh at the loss. If he could have directly harvested the undamaged soul, there was a high chance of it being an epic massive soul. It might have even had an ego. Before he could ponder over the loss or check his status, the whole tunnel suddenly started tilting. The twitching and thrashing had stopped with the giant's death, but the huge figure now started slowly falling over. In a panic, Seth climbed and tumbled up his tunnel and out of the armor layer that covered the giant. When he came out of the hole in the shoulder, he saw a massive mountain wall coming at him with murderous intent. Ah, no! The giant was falling and about to crash into it. He had to get away or he might get squashed between a rock and a mountain. Puffles? Anybody? He called out after taking off the helm of Hades. Moments of silence followed as the rock wall drew near. I'm here. Grab my hand, he heard an aged voice. It was not Puffles, but Zardoz the old wizard who was reaching his hand out to him. He was Levi-tottying above him with his fluttery robes. Thankfully the old man wore long pants under it. Seth grabbed the wrinkly wizard's hand, and they flew out of the crash zone. They steered to a cliff in the mountainside. Before they could land, Finn had already rushed to Seth in the air. You are okay. Finn is so glad, the little brute hectically flew around them, but her high-pitched voice was drowned out by the rumbling of rocks and crashing of stones as the giant figure behind them collided with the mountains and broke apart. Carefully the wizard lowered Seth before landing himself. At the small cliff, the 7 surviving vanguards were hiding and holding their ears. Seth followed suit once he had both hands freed. The unbelievable noise of a mountain crumbling was already loud, but the cacophony was further amplified by the surrounding mountains and the echoes. They could only wait there and shut their ears until it was over. What was left of the walking mountain was a big valley filled with big rocks and giant boulders, like the glacial field almost. The whole place was covered in parts of the stone giant's armor suits, and in the middle of all of that was its true body. A roughly humanoid figure made up of dark stone. With 40 to 50 meters, the actual giant was about the same size as the giants Seth had met on the plain. The 7 survivors looked at Seth in wonder and a tinge of fear. After all, he had just killed that thing. Without a trap or anything. Sir, we won't contest with you about the body, we only need the Kale Yapes from its head. The wizard approached. Seth remembered that he had not even introduced himself. You can call me Seth, Seth Smith. You can have the thing, but first, where is my pet? He looked around and only got an answer a few moments later. Arim, we don't know. It told me to fetch you before it flew away, the wizard answered, embarrassed. Well, it's okay as long as he is fine. Seth shrugged and got back to the topic. Say, how are you going to get that thing out of its head? Its skin is so hard it even dulled my pickaxe. Oh, we have a solution for that. In our kingdom, we have a very quirky researcher. He said he came from a much more advanced world. He has many weird ideas. One is something he calls Operation Magic. With this scroll, we can create something like a tunnel that allows us to take out the Kale Yapes without harming the carcass, the old man happily explained as they climbed down towards the half-buried body. That sounds almost like an application of space or even dimensional magic. Who would come up with something this crazy just to operate on something? The Lich grumbled, perplexed. As someone who had seen both worlds, he roughly understood her sentiments. People from worlds with a high level of magic could solve almost any issue with healing magic. There were only few issues that magic or system functions could not take care of. From the perspective of modern science, it would be revolutionary to circumvent the body tissue to directly operate in a specific area without having to worry about opening the body. The theory sounded interesting, but the execution was almost surreal. Zardoz used the scroll at the giant's head, and in the designated area, the skull simply vanished. It was as if someone took a cookie cutter and punched a hole in the head. The brain laid open, they could directly see past the skin and skull. That's when Seth realized just how much the body was actually worth. Its whole brain was made of arcane gold. In one of the windings close to the brain stem was something that did not quite fit. It looked like a crystal that grew in the shape of a plant or moss. This was the Kale Yapes. And then the wizard simply climbed into this hole and plucked it off. When he came out, the hole closed again. There was no sign of damage left behind. What a crazy waste of research and materials, Al only commented. Sir, if there is any way we can thank you, please tell me, the wizard finally spoke after putting away the stone. They had talked about a remuneration before, but Seth had no idea for now. He just didn't feel like working for free. Seeing the old man being this sincere, he did not want to let it just end like this. Also, he was quite happy with the stone giant. How about we leave it as a favor, he suggested. Okay. How can we contact you? Here, take this ring. I can identify you at my place. I am the Tower Master of Minas Mar in Delta. If you want to contact me, you can do it through the System Church. Thank you, we will do that. Please excuse us now, we already lost a lot of time. With that, the people of Murtana bid their farewell and left. Their entrance to the pathwork was not far away. Seth on the other hand stayed behind and shoved the giant into his inventory. Then his eyes fell on the field of rubble. There were a lot of ores in these stones, it would take a long time to mine this place clean. But where was Puffles? I'm here. Puffles landed behind him, his jaw still crunching something. Don't tell me. I had a snack. Did you eat the ores? Yes, they are mine, right? You get that core body and I get the snack that fell off it. The snacks that fell of it. The Ivisor was talking about a mountain of ores as if it was a pack of potato chips. Fine, but you have to bring me all the ores you can't or don't want to eat in exchange. Deal. Chapter 360. Coming home. Having dealt with all the riffraff in the vicinity, Seth could finally concentrate on laying out the formation and carving them into the stone. In the meantime, Puffles the Voracious was gorging on the ores in the valley. Finn seemed rather satisfied to just spend time with Seth as they made small talk while he was chiseling the formations into the ground using the resharpened pickaxe. Finn, can you go and get Puffles? I am done here in a minute, then we have to go and get the others, he asked Finn after he was finished transferring the complicated patterns and formulas onto the ground. When the two returned, the Ivisor had gone through an obvious change. The sleek and terrifying centipede had turned back into a fat caterpillar. Puffles kept making weird insectoid noises that reminded him of a fat man's burps after overeating. Simon, to mention a name. Can you even fly properly in this state? Dante looked down on Puffles, the mighty. It won't be any slower when we walk, don't complain. I didn't mean to offend you, you bundle of joy. Seth avoided mentioning the bloated state of the caterpillar again and came on board the zeppelin-shaped and sized insect. They returned to camp, where they spent some awkward moments explaining the terrifying noise that had unsettled the people. He visited the Commando Central to bid farewell before they set off. Yule Cat's Fur chose their own mounts, while Evan, Pip, and the children rode a giant snake. Duhu, Linry, Whedon, Azul, and Finn boarded the many-legged Zeppelin bug. A surprising addition to their little entourage was the mysterious archer. His name was Ahorn, and he expressed his wish to join Mina's march. The bundle of arrows Seth had given him during the battle on the plains, together with his overall conduct, had won him over. Maybe it also had something to do with the fact that Mike had explained to him all the benefits he could get as a member of the field service. Who knew what had convinced him in the end? At least Seth was confident that it was his brilliant leadership on their journey. With everyone mounted on various pets and beasts, they set off and arrived at their teleport location a few hours later. It was already late at night, but that was no problem, as Seth shared some of the improvised night vision equipment he had made for the caravan. The members of the party marveled at the sight of the giant formation, carved into the flat rock surface. Clean and sharp lines were hewn into the rock, like a fine wood carving. People from Delta, like the archer and Evan, thought of the work of a CNC machine. Okay, everyone scatter within the outer circle and don't enter the inner on. Seth warned them before he stepped to a recess in the center of the formation. It was a perfect square shape and the golden plate sent by Evie fit in perfectly. Now came the most important part. He would insert the plate into the formation and then link the soul of the champion to it, to supply it with power. Once the power source was in place, the beacon would send a signal through space. If everything was like Alzalsar had deduced, Evie would monitor the tower systems and look for the beacon's frequency. Then Mina's Mar could lock onto their location and open a wormhole at their location. The formation would stabilize this wormhole, so they could travel through it safely. The blacksmith took the living soul, sealed by his whimsical curse, from the pouch on his belt and carefully placed it onto the plate. At least this part was simple. Complicated formations like this had a makeup similar to modern circuit boards. Seth just needed to connect the soul to the power input to activate it. Then he hurriedly stepped back as the magic unfolded. Or was supposed to unfold. Nothing happened. Give it some time. Al reassured. They waited. It took a while, but finally, the formation started glowing. From the 12 tips of the formation's dodecagram, tethers of light emerged and latched onto something in midair. Between the tethers opened an almost round portal in the shape of a 12-sided polygon. See, I told you. The Lich commented smugly as everyone watched at what was happening in surprise. The portal was reeled in by the tethers and came to a halt in the center of the formation. What are you people doing, just staring at it? It's stable now, hurry through before the formation deteriorates. Al warned the crowd. The lines carved into the stone surface were glowing red-hot from the energy they were channeling. Once something became liquid, it could destabilize the passage. Hurriedly they started sending through the people who could not use the system teleport to return home. First were Pip and the children, then Linry, Whedon, Azul, and Evan. Since the space tunnel was still stable, Yule Cat's Fur, Seth, the archer, and Duhu went through together. Returning to the familiar entrance hall of the magic tower, a huge weight fell off Seth's shoulder. He saw the bunch of children, Whedon and Linry standing there, looking around in wonder. Evan, Azul, Duhu and the archer were not much better than the children. He did it. It was over. He had finally returned home and kept his promises. Whether it was the sheer relief or the fatigue from his fight earlier, Seth didn't know, but suddenly the world went dark before him. The blacksmith collapsed right after returning home. Soft warmth enveloped his body. How long had it been since he slept in a proper bed? When he opened his eyes, he saw a familiar room. Seth was in his bed in the Tower Master's quarters. Was it all just a bad dream? He wished it was like that, but his status told him otherwise. He was level 60 and there was a small button in the corner called Advancement Options. He had thrown this in the back of his mind when he leveled up. The situation at the time was a little too chaotic, but now he had finally time to think. Although he had returned home, his work did not end here. He had to take care of Linry, Whedon, his duties as the Tower Master, and most importantly the vessel for Alzalsar. Seth decided to start off by doing something he could do without leaving the bed. The class advancement. He clicked on the button and was shown the options for class advancement for Spirit Blacksmith. To his surprise, there was nothing like changing to an advanced class like there were for magicians or swordsmen. For him, there were optional traits he could choose from to strengthen the specialization of his class. Blood of the Blacksmith, trait. Blood of the Craftsman, trait. Blood of the Necromancer, trait. Blood of the Inventor, trait. The descriptions for these were short and vague, but at least they had some unlike kin of fire. In summary, they gave boosts the different fields his class was related to. The trait of the blacksmith would further strengthen the power of his blacksmith skills and the performance of items he made, that counted as armors or weapons. The trait of the craftsman was less specific and could boost all crafting skills, but at a lesser rate than the blacksmith. In exchange, his skills like enchantment or sewing would also gain a boost. The trait of a necromancer had to do with working with souls. The description was the vaguest, but Seth guessed that it would increase the power of his soul-related skills like spirit capture. Lastly, the trait of the inventor was slightly ambiguous as it did not affect skills of a certain field, but the power of skills that were used to invent things. Following that, it also increased the performance of devices, instead of weapons or armor. Seth was not sure where that trait came from. Did he have skills to invent things? Ugh, you really are dense like lead. You have blueprints, don't you? And part of your smithy is that golem you call Cerberus. The person you inherited that class from was obviously adept in more than just making weapons. Why else would I have given you that manual? The Lich ranted. It made sense. Until now, Seth had unconsciously avoided this part of his abilities. He never was one of those boys that dreamed of riding a mech. Seth wouldn't have chosen the class of a blacksmith, to begin with. You have time now, you should read the manual. I am sure you will understand why that is the trait you should choose. Are you sure it isn't because it would mean that your vessel would be more powerful? The Lich only answered with which on convinced him even more that he was right. However, he would not dismiss her advice so easily. Following what the sorceress said, Seth brought out the thick tome that was the manual of how to create her vessel.